In the summer of 1990, in a sleepy Wisconsin town, Barrett Beck, an 18-year-old girl with musical dreams and aspirations, embarked on her first trip, a seemingly open door to the future, but just hours after leaving her family, Barrett disappeared in broad daylight. Her van was found with unusual markings, a torn red shirt, and an irreplaceable void in the hearts of her loved ones. When her body was found more than a month later, strangled and dumped in a deserted ditch, the small community was plunged into fear and obsession. Who extinguished that bright light? Who robbed a gentle, talented, and hopeful girl of her future? Why does a case that seems clear-cut become murky when clues and suspects keep changing, and justice is delayed for decades? Barrett Beck was born on April 18, 1972, in Sturtevant, Wisconsin, a small town of about 7,000 people. She had a younger brother named Ben. Everyone remarked that Barrett was intelligent, talented, and had loved music since childhood. This passion grew even stronger as she turned 18. Barrett dreamed of pursuing a career in the creative field. In high school, her talent was evident. She played the violin, piano, and many other instruments, and sang very well. In the summer of 1989, she toured the United States with a Christian band. Besides, faith is an important part of her life. In high school, Barrett dated Curtis. He proposed, but she felt it was too early because she wanted to prioritize her studies and career. They agreed to take it slow, at least until they graduated from college, but they were still engaged and things were going well. Barrett had chosen a college and aimed to become financially independent from her parents. She was ambitious and didn't want the typical teen jobs. Even without a degree, she set her sights higher. Instead of working as a waitress or store clerk, she decided to seek a secretarial position at a construction company. She found the job by chance and felt confident because of her strong computer skills. She signed up for an interview and quickly impressed the manager. Despite not having any qualifications, she was hired on the condition that she attend a 3-day computer training course for new employees. This was a job with good salary and promising opportunity, so she decided to join. The training was in Appleton, about 150 kilometers away. Barrett asked her family for help, but no one could accompany her. Her mother was recovering from an injury. Her father was working and caring for her mother. Her brother was too young, and her fiancé, Curtis, couldn't get time off. Barrett saw this as a challenge rather than a setback. She didn't want to miss the chance to land a better job and improve her finances. So she decided to make the trip alone. It would be her first long-distance trip without someone accompanying her, and she was understandably nervous. Barrett prepared carefully for the seminar scheduled for July 17, 1990. She packed meticulously, made a list of essentials, and got her two-tone 1987 phone ready, including adding a roof rack. It was a popular, comfortable, and practical vehicle at the time. On July 17, she woke early, double-checked everything, said goodbye to her family, and drove to Curtis's house to see him before leaving town. After spending some time together, she set off. Her first stop was in Fond du Lac, about 100 kilometers away. She visited a large shopping center, bought cosmetics and travel items, including a whitening kit, and left the receipt in her van. This was around 11 o'clock a.m. Trouble began when she didn't arrive in Appleton at the scheduled time. The supervisor who had interviewed her and was expecting her at the training session noticed her absence. At first, she assumed Barrett was simply running late. Since cell phones were not common at the time, the supervisor could not contact Barrett directly, so she called the phone number Barrett had provided to her family. When the supervisor contacted Barrett's parents, they were confused and worried. They said they had seen her off early that morning and were waiting for her to call upon arrival. They assumed her silence was due to travel delays or a busy schedule, not realizing something more serious might have happened. Barrett's mother, Diane, was recovering from a snowmobile accident and couldn't go looking for her herself, but she was extremely worried and couldn't sit still. She called Barrett's boyfriend, Curtis, and learned that Barrett had left him some time ago. She then contacted all of Barrett's friends, but none knew where she was. Barrett's father decided to act. He put Diane in the car and drove to Appleton. There, he confirmed that Barrett had never arrived and hadn't checked into the hotel room he'd reserved for her. At that point, it was clear something was wrong. The parents knew that Barrett was a responsible person, took her job very seriously, and was on her way to an important event that had a significant impact on her future. They immediately started searching and called the police. The police do not use the excuse of waiting 24 hours. They recognized the seriousness of the situation and acted immediately. They organized multiple search parties. The number of volunteers quickly increased. Barrett's family was devastated and offered a substantial reward for information, $75,000. They hoped it would help bring her home alive. Instead, it triggered a flood of false tips. Rumors spread. Calls poured in, and investigators lost precious time following leads that went nowhere. On July 19, 2 days after the search began, Barrett's travel-converted van was found abandoned in a shopping center parking lot near the store where she had last been seen in Fond du Lac. Multiple witnesses said the van hadn't been there on July 17 or 18. Patrols who had driven by several times also reported seeing nothing unusual earlier. An inspection of the van revealed troubling details. The odometer showed more than 500 kilometers, even though the trip to Fond du Lac should have been around 100. Inside, officers found empty cigarette packs, numerous wrappers, and loose tobacco. Even though Barrett didn't smoke, about 70 items were collected from the vehicle, many of which the family could not identify and insisted did not belong to her. Barrett herself was missing, and there were no clues pointing to her whereabouts. There were, however, ominous signs. Her red shirt, the one she planned to wear to the seminar and considered a lucky charm, was found in the van. It was badly damaged. A large section had been torn away, and the missing piece was not found in or around the vehicle. Detectives began to fear that Barrett's parents might never see their daughter alive again. Despite a careful analysis of the evidence, the investigation stalled. Weeks passed with no breakthroughs. Then, 5 weeks after Barrett went missing, on August 22, a farmer near Waupun noticed something in a roadside ditch while driving his tractor to a nearby field. He stopped to investigate and discovered a severely decomposed human body. The August heat, intense sun, and insect activity had accelerated decomposition, and bones were beginning to show. He immediately called law enforcement. Police at the scene could learn little from the remains, so they ordered laboratory tests and brought in specialists. Entomologists studied the insects present and determined the victim had been dead for over a month. They also concluded the victim was a young woman, about 17 to 20 years old. This wasn't enough to identify her definitively, but it did narrow the search. Reviewing local missing person reports reduced the possibilities to a few names, including 18-year-old Barrett Beck. The victim showed multiple signs of strangulation on her neck. She was blindfolded, and there were no cuts or gunshot wounds. So the medical examiner determined the cause of death to be strangulation. Notably, the blindfold was a red rag. Forensic analysis confirmed the fabric matched a torn shirt found in Barrett's abandoned car. Combined with dental records, this evidence positively identified the body as 18 years old, Barrett Beck. When the police searching for her were notified, the case was officially reclassified as a homicide. The body was found nude except for socks, suggesting possible abuse. However, the state of decomposition made it impossible to confirm or disprove this hypothesis. No bodily fluids could be recovered. A search of the area near the body turned up some of Barrett's personal items, but several pieces of jewelry were missing. Her gold ring, a gift from her boyfriend, and her wristwatch were gone. The car was also missing a radio and radar detector, It was suspected the killer took them either to sell or to mislead investigators. After a thorough examination of the car, police found the ring under the floor mat on the driver's side. The rest of the items were still missing. Investigators compiled detailed descriptions of the missing items and canvas pawn shops near where the body was found and in nearby suburbs. New leads emerged. No one recognized the items. The investigation pressed on. The geography complicated matters. The distance between the body and the abandoned van spanned tens of kilometers. Yet the van's high mileage suggested the killer drove much farther. No fingerprints were found on the steering wheel or gear shift. They had been wiped clean, indicating the killer deliberately removed traces. Other evidence left in the van might have contained the killer's DNA, but attempts to develop a profile failed. The samples were too limited for 1,990 seconds forensic methods. Eventually, the county sheriff took personal charge of the case. He was struck by the van's mileage and tried to reconstruct Barrett's movements. The van was bright and outfitted with extra equipment, making it theoretically noticeable, but the model was common. Moreover, traffic camera systems were hardly common at the time, so this line of investigation reached a dead end. The killer had the van for several days, drove it extensively, yet avoided police detection. Given the calculated behavior and method of murder, investigators considered whether the killer might have known Barrett. Heiress' social circle, however, consisted of respectable people. Barrett was intelligent, law-abiding, and had no bad habits. The last person to see her alive was her boyfriend, Curtis, so he was scrutinized, more from a lack of other leads than real suspicion. Curtis immediately maintained his innocence, cooperated fully, and took a polygraph. He was quickly cleared. He had a strong alibi, having remained in the city and at work for the days following his meeting with Barrett. He could not have traveled the roughly 500 kilometers associated with her disappearance. Investigators then turned to men with criminal records living in Fond du Lac at the time. Their prime suspect became a local career criminal named Craig Rohn, known in criminal circles as Psycho for his explosive temper and poor impulse control. The erratic young man had a lengthy criminal record. Craig drew law enforcement's attention because he was known for stealing cars and committing armed robberies. While Barrett wasn't physically assaulted, her car was used for an extended period. Around the time Barrett drove to a work event, Craig was seen in the Fond du Lac area. In the winter of 1991, detectives searched Craig's property under a warrant. From the start, Craig was uncooperative. He denied any involvement in the car theft and Barrett's death, refused to provide an alibi, and refused to take a polygraph test. Craig insisted the investigation was a setup and that he was being made a scapegoat. Still, searches of his home and car turned up no evidence linking him to the crimes. Despite this, detectives remained convinced of his guilt and focused on building a case against him. Police records show that Craig had serious behavioral problems from his teenage years, including running away from home, taking banned substances, and getting involved in the underworld. He dropped out of school, began stealing cars, and later added robberies to his offenses. Eventually, he received his first prison sentence. By the 1,990 seconds, Craig had a lengthy rap sheet and multiple stints in prison. He had a reputation as a career criminal who lived off illegal activity. People close to him believed he was capable of any crime, even murder. However, he had no known history of violence against women. Investigators still considered him dangerous and suspected he could kill without remorse, so they tried to link him to Barrett's disappearance. They believed the lack of evidence was due to his experience. He knew what to eliminate and how to avoid leaving traces. There were reasons for suspicion. Around the time of Barrett's abduction, Craig was staying at a motel near the Fond du Lac shopping center. Still, the evidence was circumstantial, and prosecutors couldn't charge him with Barrett's murder. A short time later, Craig was arrested on unrelated charges and sent to federal prison. This eased concerns about public safety while the investigation continued. A police informant, Tim Amundsen, then deepened suspicion by claiming Craig had confessed to the murder and even shown him Barrett's body. According to Tim, the body was left in the stolen van for nearly a day before Craig disposed of it outside the city. Yet the longer detectives worked the case, the clearer it became. There was no solid evidence tying Craig to the crime. They decided not to prosecute him in connection with Barrett's murder. That decision proved sound. Tim later recanted, admitting he had fabricated the story. Tim said he despised Craig and wanted him imprisoned long-term to prevent future harm. Tim's account was based on details from detectives and TV reports. He even failed a polygraph, confirming he was lying. Detectives then reviewed physical evidence and found 12 fingerprints on items in Barrett's car. The tests showed that they did not belong to Barrett or anyone close to her, and they did not match against police databases. Importantly, they did not match Craig either. Even after Craig was imprisoned on unrelated charges, investigators kept monitoring him. Despite no matching fingerprints, detectives have not given up on the theory that he killed Barrett. For years, there were no leads. Only in 2013 did the 1990 case come back to life, when a new cold case team was formed. A new detective joined the team and was given the first task: to collect all of Barrett Beck's documents and artifacts from the archives, digitize them, and review them. In February 2014, the investigation finally produced a breakthrough. An analyst at the Wisconsin State Crime Lab re-examined evidence from the van and discovered 9 previously unidentified fingerprints on 5 items, including a Burger King cup. In addition, police found a manual from the company where Barrett was planning to work, a teeth whitening kit she had purchased at a Fond du Lac supermarket, and cigarette and candy wrappers. All were sent for analysis and compared to a database. The initial hope was slim, but then the results came. All 9 fingerprints belonged to the same person in the database: Dennis Brantner, 61, a truck driver in Kenosha. Just before Barrett went missing, he repaired the stove in her family's home, thus linking him to the family and possibly to she. Detectives then reviewed his criminal history. His first arrest was in 1994 for assaulting, kidnapping, and beating his second wife. By then, many people had already noticed his volatile, manipulative behavior toward women. One co-worker even remembered Dennis saying he wanted to kidnap, abuse, and kill a woman. With this information, detectives searched his Kenosha home in 2014 with a search warrant, hoping to find missing items from Barrett's truck that the killer may have kept as trophies. Nothing from the van was found, which was not surprising given the time that had passed. However, investigators seized a computer, storage devices, a photo album, and several discs for analysis. Later that year, Dennis was brought in for questioning. He initially claimed he didn't know who Barrett was and insisted he was innocent. When informed that his fingerprints matched evidence from the van, his demeanor changed. He immediately said he hadn't killed her, suggesting he knew more than he admitted. Despite this, the first interview did not yield a confession, and he was released. His erratic behavior only deepened investigators' suspicions, but they still needed physical evidence. On March 27, 2015, Dennis was arrested and charged with first-degree murder in the death of Barrett Beck, drawing national attention. Barrett's family remained skeptical. For 25 years, his name had never been mentioned as a suspect. Barrett's family knew him, believed he was harmless and unlikely to attack Barrett. They also believed the police had the wrong man. Nevertheless, the trial began in June 2016. As the trial progressed, Dennis's parents and brother became increasingly convinced that he was guilty. The prosecution relied on fingerprints, the only direct evidence, and a slew of circumstantial evidence, including the suspect's cigarettes and cigarette butts found in the abandoned truck. They also presented witness statements and accounts of the man's disturbing past behavior, suggesting a pattern of cruelty and control toward women. The defense countered that the case was weak and largely circumstantial, emphasizing omitted details. most notably that some DNA samples from the truck did not match Dennis. The defense sought to introduce a previous suspect, Craig Crone, but the judge barred any mention of him during the hearing. Barrett's family and her boyfriend, Curtis, testified emotionally about their lives since her murder. Still, after 3 weeks of testimony, the jury could not reach a verdict, and a mistrial was declared. A retrial was ordered in January 2017. At the retrial, the evidence was largely unchanged, and both sides appeared to have a viable path to victory. On his attorney's advice, Dennis pleaded guilty to negligent homicide in February 2018, though he refused to provide full details to substantiate his account. At the time, Dennis was 64. Sentencing followed state laws from the 1,990 seconds, which capped the penalty at 10 years. He received the maximum on March 1, 2018. He had already served 3 years in pretrial detention, which counted toward his sentence, and he remained eligible for parole. In the best case, he could be released around age 75. He is currently incarcerated. After the sentencing, Barrett's family spoke to the press, expressing deep dissatisfaction. They noted that the original charges could have carried more than 5 years and felt the final sentence was too lenient. They said they had hoped this dangerous predator would spend the rest of his life in prison. As it stands, Dennis could eventually regain his freedom and, in their view, pose a risk to others. By the summer of 2016, Annie Hester's life in Gresham, Oregon, seemed to have found peace after years of divorce. But one June night, that peace was torn apart. When police arrived at the scene, they were confronted with a scene so horrific that it stunned even seasoned investigators. The front door was wide open. The belongings hadn't been rummaged through, but on the floor were long streaks of blood leading to Annie's body. Stabbed more than 60 times, with many wounds so deep they nearly severed her head. On her shoulder, the killer had carved the letters VXV, a strange sign that no one understood as a message, a symbol, or a challenge. The investigation quickly ruled out robbery or random attack. The crime scene revealed a carefully planned crime, driven by cold hatred and jealousy. What haunted the police most was the way the killer had broken in. Only someone who was too familiar with the apartment could have done so. So who killed Annie Hester? Why did a gentle, hard-working mother who devoted herself to her daughter have to die in such extreme pain? Annie Hester spent her entire life in Gresham, Oregon. Her childhood was difficult. When she was a teenager, her father died, and she relied on her mother and stepfather to get through. Despite the loss, Annie stayed close to her family and remained resilient. Friends and acquaintances describe Annie as trustworthy and determined. She is hardworking, has leadership qualities, and those qualities are reflected in every aspect of life. Her greatest joy, though, came from games. She loved role-playing adventures and cosplay festivals, and was a familiar face at local game shops. In the community of people with similar interests, Annie met Matthew Hester again. They had first met in 1999, when Matthew was married to someone else. Years passed, and they went their separate ways. Then, by chance, they met again at a local game store. This time, Matthew was divorced. From that meeting, they started dating and got married in 2008. In 2011, their daughter, Alice, was born. Annie was overjoyed, but the happiness didn't last. Just 1 year later, Matthew made the very mistake that had ruined his previous marriage: infidelity. Annie tried to forgive him, but the trust was gone. After more lies and broken promises, Annie made a hard choice. She filed for divorce and started over as a single mother. She and Alice moved into a small one-bedroom apartment. Annie gave Alice the bedroom and slept on a mattress in the living room. Annie worked tirelessly. During the day, she cared for children in an after-school program. At night, she worked at a downtown call center. Her dedication paid off, and she eventually became a manager. Still, the long hours took a toll, and Matthew's child support was inconsistent because he frequently changed jobs. Even so, she persevered to ensure that her daughter Alice had everything she needed, even when Matthew remarried. To a woman named Angela, Annie remained polite. The two families occasionally dined together or took Alice out. Annie has always been creative and appreciative of the little things. During Christmas, she made her own decorations and designed cards with Alice's face for her family. On weekends, when Alice was with her father, Annie took on extra work, often painting faces at local events. For her, staying busy was both a way to make a living and a way to express herself. She bore everything with a quiet strength. In the summer of 2016, that strength was tested by a terrible tragedy. One night, police were called to Annie's apartment in Gresham, Oregon. What they found shocked even experienced investigators. The intruder did not enter through the front door, but through Alice's bedroom window. The window air conditioner had been ripped out, and a block was used to push it open. When police arrived, the front door was unlocked. Inside, the apartment was largely undisturbed. No ransacking, no missing items, suggesting robbery wasn't the motive. Blood evidence revealed a brutal attack. Annie was likely asleep when her killer struck. She tried to flee toward the front door but didn't make it. She suffered more than 60 stab wounds, many to her chest and head. The assailant even attempted to decapitate her. On her shoulder, someone had carved 3 letters, VXV. No one knew what they meant. Message, symbol, or a taunt to mislead investigators. 3 knives were found on the carpet, some from Annie's kitchen, and 1 folding knife likely brought by the attacker. Bloody shoe prints led toward the exit. Detectives questioned whether there had been one attacker or more. Alice was safe. She had been staying with Matthew and Angela that night. Had she been home, she might also have been attacked. Neighbors reported disturbing sounds, screams and crashing around 11:15 p.m. Later, loud arguments, slamming doors, and groans that continued past 1 o'clock. AWS. One neighbor turned up the TV to drown out the noise. No one called for help. Only one person finally did, the victim herself, Annie. At 3 o'clock a.m. gasping for breath and barely able to speak, she managed to dial 911. It was a final act of desperation from a woman fighting for her life. From the first sounds neighbors reported around 11 o'clock p.m. to the moment Annie called for help, nearly 4 hours passed. Investigators found this deeply alarming. It implied the attack was not brief but prolonged, cruel, and essentially torture. They needed answers, but there were no suspects, no clear motive, and no explanation for the strange VXV symbol carved into Annie's body. The only thing certain, someone was determined to kill her. Police first focused on those closest to Annie. The police contacted Annie's ex-husband, Matthew Hester, and his current wife, Angela, to inform them of Annie's death and invite them to the station. Investigators needed to know about any tension, threats, or disputes. Matthew claimed that Annie had no enemies, that their relationship, though distant, was stable, and that his main concern was the safety of their daughter, Alice. He said he and Angela had been home all night with Alice and Angela's 3 children. They played video games and went to bed around 10 o'clock p.m. He claimed Angela was beside him the entire time, and she confirmed it. Angela added that she's a light sleeper and would have noticed if Matthew left during the night. However, detectives took note of Matthew's demeanor. He seemed largely unaffected by the violent death of his ex-wife, Annie. He focused on custody issues and Alice's future, and described his feelings toward Annie as mostly indifferent, wanting minimal contact with her. Matthew admitted to having an affair during the marriage, but said they had an open arrangement. According to him, Annie also explored polyamory, including a relationship with a couple she met at a pirate-themed role-playing event. Investigators located the couple and cleared them of involvement. Matthew's physical condition also raised questions. He used a cane, walked with a limp, and had obvious health issues. Given the brutality of the crime, more than 60 stab wounds, detectives doubted whether he could have carried out the attack alone. Angela was questioned separately and repeated the story. The two of them went to bed at 10 o'clock, scrolled through their phones, and then fell asleep. The house was always noisy. 4 children, a dog, and a tenant in the garage. Angela's best friend, Karina, who was renting the garage, said she was sure Matthew and Angela were home all night. Karina said she would have heard if a car left the driveway. Both Matthew and Angela voluntarily surrendered their phones, and nothing incriminating was found at that time. With no solid evidence, they were released. Meanwhile, investigators expanded the search. Teams combed the brush along the Springwater Trail with dogs and helicopters. The area had a notorious reputation for crime and illicit substances, causing concern among residents. Many people assumed Annie might have met a dangerous vagrant. But the deeper we delve into Annie's life and her custody battle with Matthew, the less convincing this theory became. Co-parenting had deteriorated, particularly after Angela entered Matthew's life. Angela quickly went from rumor to lover, and tensions with Annie escalated. Angela reportedly didn't want Matthew communicating with Annie, and Matthew pushed for full custody of Alice. The dispute went to court. 1 month before Annie's murder, the court awarded full custody of Alice to Annie. Matthew was ordered to pay more than $13,000 in back child support and nearly $30,000 in legal fees. Neither Matthew nor Angela was employed. The financial pressure and the personal stakes were immense, and Annie had won. Detectives had a pressing question. How would Matthew and Angela pay? Matthew spent most of his time at home, writing fantasy fiction and designing elaborate role-playing games. He and Angela also ran a small YouTube channel sharing his fictional worlds. However, the reality was that they owed Annie thousands of dollars in child support and court fees. While having virtually no income, they explained that they were full-time caregivers for their children, claiming that their children had mental health issues that warranted government benefits and financial assistance. Angela's ex-husband, Aaron, told investigators that her fixation on diagnosing and medicating children had contributed to their divorce. According to Aaron, Angela often insisted her kids needed prescription drugs even when doctors disagreed. Behavior he viewed as dangerous and unnecessary. He also said Angela's attention later turned to Alice, Annie's daughter. Angela became convinced Alice was bipolar, a claim Annie vehemently denied. Annie feared Angela might try to use Alice's name and alleged condition to obtain additional benefits. Experts later validated Annie's concerns. A licensed psychologist explained that labeling normal developmental behaviors as mental illnesses was harmful, and there was no formal diagnostic criteria for bipolar disorder in children under 6. Tensions escalated when Child Protective Services received a report that Annie was neglecting her daughter, Alice. She didn't know who made the call and was devastated. The case was quickly dismissed as unfounded, but the emotional impact was severe. In an email to a friend, she wrote painfully that she did not understand and asked why she had to endure all that. The motives were clear to investigators: child custody, jealousy, and money. 3 powerful reasons. Matthew and Angela could have wanted Annie gone, but motive alone wasn't enough. They still lacked hard evidence. The detectives brought Matthew and Angela back for more questioning. Matthew surprised them by taking off his shirt voluntarily, showing no cuts or scratches. Because Annie fought so hard for her life, detectives believe the killer may have been injured. Matthew insisted he had nothing to hide. He admits people may suspect him, but denies any involvement in Annie's death. Angela was mostly silent, bowing her head and complaining of fatigue. However, she gave new details that contradicted her previous testimony. She now said that around 3 a.m., on the night of the murder, she had been awake. She took the dogs outside and suddenly became violently ill, so ill that Matthew had to help her shower and change clothes. This new story put both of them awake and active at the same time. Annie called 911. With no solid evidence, the detectives had to release Matthew and Angela again. But this time, they began secret surveillance. What they found was troubling. Footage showed Matthew moving easily, carrying heavy shopping bags, doing yard work, and walking without a cane. His apparent frailty during interrogation seemed staged. Worse, a neighbor's security camera recorded a vehicle leaving Matthew and Angela's driveway shortly before 1 a.m. Heading toward Annie's apartment, their housemate, Karina, who slept in the garage, had told police she hadn't heard anything. Detectives now wondered if she was protecting them. Contradictions mounted. Matthew and Angela had lied, and their claims of innocence were falling apart. A year on, Annie's family is still waiting for answers. The brutality of her murder made silence unbearable. A reward was offered for information that could bring justice. Months later, the case remained unsolved. Annie's killer was still at large. The pain her family suffered was immeasurable. Her mother later said she would never want another parent to go through the same agony. The grief, the unanswered questions, and Annie's absence left wounds that would not heal. Public appeals followed. Police urged anyone with information to come forward, stressing that the perpetrator had to be found. For Annie's family, justice was the only path to peace. Meanwhile, Matthew and Angela quietly moved nearly 700 miles away, making it more difficult for them to cooperate in the investigation. But the detectives did not give up. Then came the turning point. DNA samples from the knives seized at the scene were tested. The results were undeniable. Blood and DNA matched Angela. In October 2017, more than a year after Annie's murder, police located Angela in Pocatello, Idaho. She was arrested on 2 counts of aggravated murder and 1 count of first-degree theft. When arrested, Angela flew into a rage, screaming that she had young children at home and demanding answers. Detectives stood firm. She was charged with intentionally killing Annie, and prosecutors added an additional charge, alleging torture. If convicted, Angela faced life in prison, and at that time, possibly the death penalty. She pleaded not guilty, insisting she was innocent despite mounting evidence. Detectives then turned to Matthew. They showed him Annie's autopsy photos, hoping to break his ice. At first, Matthew denied any involvement. He later admitted Angela came home the night of the murder covered in blood. He claimed she was panicking, and that he only helped her clean up. He said he didn't know what she had done, though he also acknowledged that he and Angela had previously discussed killing Annie. Matthew then tried to shift blame to Angela's ex-husband, Aaron. Detectives thoroughly questioned Aaron but found no evidence linking him to the crime. He was never charged. Court records reveal the chilling details of the charges against Angela: stabbing Annie more than 60 times, attempting to decapitate her, and carving VXV into her skin. It was a crime defined by rage and cruelty. The strongest incriminating evidence came from her Google Maps search history. 3 days after the murder, Angela looked up a spot in Mount Hood National Forest. Detectives went there and found a boot buried near a tree. It matched a bloody shoe print at the scene. A diver later recovered a plastic bag nearby containing Angela's clothing. The fabric pattern, size, and purchase history directly linked her. The evidence was overwhelming. As investigators dug deeper, they found another disturbing detail. Annie had a $100,000 life insurance policy, naming her parents as beneficiaries. Shortly after her death, someone called the insurance company, not her parents, but Matthew, asking if he could receive the payout. When told no information could be provided, he hung up. By 2019, prosecutors expanded the case. Matthew was charged with 2 counts of conspiracy to commit murder, 1 count of solicitation to commit murder, and 1 count of hindering prosecution. He pleaded not guilty. Like Angela, but the evidence grew. In 2020, Angela changed her plea and admitted to second-degree murder. Oregon law had changed by then, eliminating the possibility of the death penalty. But she was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. Matthew's case concluded later. In 2021, he pleaded guilty to soliciting Angela's brother to commit murder and to hindering prosecution. His sentence was considered light, given the severity of the case. Just 56 months. Less than 5 years. Many criticized the outcome, but prosecutors called it strategic. If stronger evidence later emerged against Matthew, they could still prosecute him for conspiracy to commit murder. If he was acquitted, that would not be possible. Angela and Matthew divorced while incarcerated. Angela has not spoken publicly about Annie since her arrest. Angela's child was placed in foster care, and Alice was adopted by Annie's mother. Alice finally found the safety and love in the family Annie had always wanted for her. Those who had worked with Annie remembered her not only as a victim, she was an inspiration, a tireless worker who shouldered many hardships yet still brought joy to others. Her positivity, even in her darkest moments, left a lasting mark. In her final moments, Annie reflected what she always embodied: strength, resilience, and a fierce will to fight. Daphne Huard-Boudreau was born in 1998 in Quebec, Canada. While she was still in school, her parents separated, so she spent her childhood in 2 homes. Despite the divorce, both parents remained present in her life. From an early age, Daphne was adaptable, empathetic, and remarkably skilled at soothing conflicts. She longed for harmony in her family, friendships, and relationships. Even as a teenager, she expressed dreams of working in psychology and helping people who struggled emotionally. By age 18, Daphne had graduated high school and was preparing for the next stage, choosing her profession and living independently. She already had a part-time job at a small store to feel financially free. On the outside, she seemed confident, but those close to her knew she was fragile. Anthony Pratelops, on the other hand, was born in Quebec but was placed under youth protection almost immediately after birth. By the age of 18 months, he had already lived in 3 different foster homes. He had been taken from his biological parents due to severe neglect, lack of basic care, and developmental risks. These early traumas left deep, lasting wounds. Later evaluations concluded that his capacity to form healthy emotional attachments had been severely damaged, though social services attempted to give him stability. The constant upheaval during critical years only worsened his condition. His early development was marked by explosive aggression, unpredictable behavior. Even in preschool, he struggled to form bonds with other children. He was distrustful, tense around adults, perceived emotional closeness as a threat. As a teenager, teachers complained about his behavior, and youth workers noticed he often had difficulty communicating. Beneath his anger was a profound fear of abandonment, a fear that shaped every relationship he entered, making them unstable from the beginning. For him, breakups were not a normal part of life. They were catastrophic losses. As he grew older, he became better at hiding his inner volatility, but he never learned to manage it. Outwardly, he seemed quiet and reserved, but inside, he remained the same frightened child who never understood why he had been given away and what he needed to do to prevent it from happening again. This emotional immaturity, hidden behind an adult facade, made his reactions unpredictable. As an adult, he had numerous encounters with law enforcement. Erratic behavior, disregard for rules, and hostility toward those in authority. Police records noted that he could react dangerously in stressful situations and recommended caution when dealing with him. Though these warnings resulted in no long-term supervision or structured support, in February 2015, Daphne met Anthony. She was 16, he was 20. The connection quickly developed into a romantic relationship. Daphne was finishing high school and still uncertain about her long-term plans. Yet she yearned for independence and the feeling of entering adulthood. To her, dating an older man seemed like a step toward maturity. Anthony was very attentive. He messaged, called her often, inviting her places. In the beginning, he appeared caring, invested, almost overly devoted. For Daphne, who naturally trusted others and always tried to see the good in people, his attention felt genuine. To those around them, the relationship appeared harmless at first. Few noticed the subtle red flags that were already forming beneath the surface. Daphne's parents had been uneasy about Anthony from the very beginning. He rarely visited their home and, when he did, he appeared guarded, tense, uncomfortable. Still, they chose not to forbid the relationship outright. Daphne was no longer a child, and they wanted to respect her autonomy. Believing she was capable of making her own choices, she reassured them repeatedly that everything was fine, leaving out the more troubling aspects of the relationship. For the first few months, things seemed calm. They spent time together, made plans for the future. Anthony pushed the idea that once Daphne turned 18, they should get their own apartment and live together. He insisted they were ready to be independent, that they could handle adult life as a team. Although she hesitated, Daphne slowly gave in. She liked being seen as someone mature enough to build a life with an older partner. And because he made her feel valued, she was aware he wasn't steadily employed and mostly lived on welfare. But she didn't focus on it. He said health issues kept him from working and that it wouldn't last forever. Even though she paid most of their expenses, she wasn't worried about it. During this period, Anthony began showing possessive behaviors, though not yet openly aggressive ones. He was jealous of her classmates and acquaintances, reacted strongly to social media messages, asked endless questions about people from her past. Occasionally, he told her to stop talking to anyone he believed didn't respect their relationship. It seemed like ordinary jealousy, nothing extreme, at least not yet. Looking back, the winter and spring of 2015 were likely the calmest months of their entire relationship. Neither Daphne nor her family understood how unstable and dangerous Anthony truly was. From the outside, their romance appeared like a typical teenage relationship filled with excitement, dreams. But the early signs were already there: dependency, control, and shrinking personal boundaries. Bit by bit, Daphne noticed her independence slipping away, replaced by constant efforts to adjust to his moods. Each month, she bent a little more, setting aside her own needs. She convincing herself that love meant patience, understanding. When Daphne turned 18, she moved into a small rented apartment with Anthony. Her parents strongly doubted the decision, but tried to honor her choices. The apartment wasn't far from her hometown, which created an illusion of safety. Daphne wanted to prove that she could handle adult life, manage responsibilities, and build a real relationship. But everyday reality quickly revealed a truth she had never seen. Living with Anthony was far more difficult than she expected. He didn't work or attend school and spent most of his time isolated in the apartment. Against that backdrop, his bursts of jealousy, anger escalated. He demanded constant attention, questioned her every move, monitored her phone, and scrutinized her conversations. His mood swung wildly, from intense affection to explosive rage. Any attempt by Daphne to go out alone or meet with friends ignited resentment or aggression. He wanted full control, Even short phone calls could spark arguments. Soon, he criticized everything: her clothes, her tone of voice, even small habits she never thought twice about. Anything could be turned into a fight. The practical and financial responsibility fell entirely on Daphne. She worked to pay rent, buy groceries, manage the household, and hold everything together. But the emotional pressure only intensified. Anthony repeatedly reminded her of his past and his life attempt and used it as a weapon to keep her close. He insisted he couldn't survive without her. These manipulative threats guilt-trip Daphne, making her believe she is responsible for his happiness. The first serious rupture came when Daphne finally gathered the courage to end the relationship. She told Anthony she wanted to break up and began packing her belongings. His reaction was immediate and explosive. He tore through the apartment in a blind rage, smashing objects, hurling her personal items, ripping cushions, breaking furniture. The noise was so loud that neighbors called the police. Officers arrived, documented the scene, and ordered him to calm down. But despite the destruction, Anthony wasn't arrested. He received only a warning. Daphne's parents rushed over as soon as they heard what had happened. They helped her pack what was left of her things and took her back home. She moved through the apartment in silence, stunned by how quickly everything had turned violent. Although she tried to appear composed, she was deeply shaken. Her parents worried about her emotional state. Sensing the inner conflict she wouldn't speak about, she was devastated. Realizing the relationship she had invested so much in was already collapsing. At this time, Anthony called, wrote, and sent long messages, begging, blaming stress, promising change. He insisted he wasn't angry, just desperate. Soon, he shifted to emotional manipulation, telling her he couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, and was thinking about ending his life. He insisted she had abandoned him at the worst moment, that he needed her now more than ever. The guilt wore her down. Despite her fear, disappointment, and the frightening incident in the apartment, she couldn't cut him off completely. Pity and worry over his threats blurred the line between affection and responsibility. At 18, she didn't yet understand the difference between love and emotional dependency. Her parents tried to convince her not to return, but they avoided pushing too hard. They couldn't forbid her from contacting him. However, persuasion wasn't enough. Reluctantly, she returned, hoping to rebuild what they once had. But nothing improved. Moments of calm were quickly replaced by suspicion and the need for control. Anthony resumed monitoring her messages, demanding explanations for every absence, every conversation. Daphne began withdrawing. She stayed quiet, avoided confrontations, and stopped sharing her struggles with her family. Her self-confidence eroded. She was terrified that leaving him again might trigger another crisis or worse. Yet she also felt the relationship hollowing her out from the inside. Anthony sensed he was regaining power. He no longer needed visible aggression. His tactics shifted toward dependency. He used insults, silent treatments, and accusations of betrayal. Whenever she tried to express a thought or assert herself, he turned it into an attack. He insisted he couldn't survive without her, that something terrible would happen to him if she ever walked away. It became a psychological trap, caught between fear, pity, guilt, and hope. Daphne lost her ability to see the situation clearly. She lived in a constant state of tension, convinced she couldn't leave without causing him irreversible harm. Her attempt to save someone she cared about slowly cost her control over her own life. In March 2017, Daphne is determined to end her relationship with Anthony. She had already tried to rebuild this relationship too many times. This time, she simply packed her belongings, left their shared apartment, and didn't look back. For the next few days, she alternated between her mother's home and her father's, taking advantage of their separate households to avoid staying in one place for too long. Anthony refused to accept that the breakup was final. To him, This was just another temporary withdrawal, something she had done before and eventually reversed. He continued sending her messages every day, shifting between desperate pleas for her to come back and angry accusations of betrayal. He called repeatedly, but Daphne never answered. When he could no longer reach her directly, he began contacting her parents, texting her mother to ask where she was. But he received no reply. Soon, he turned to her friends and acquaintances, asking if they knew where she was staying. He monitored her social media activity, checking when she appeared online. His efforts to reach her became increasingly intrusive. Relentless, Daphne eventually shut off her phone entirely, knowing that any response, no matter how small, would pull her back into the same destructive cycle. Anthony then began using intermediaries. He asked acquaintances to drive past her parents' homes to check if her car was there, searched for any opportunity to corner her into a meeting. Her silence wasn't a rejection in his eyes. It was merely a temporary obstacle he needed to overcome. Around this time, Anthony discovered that Daphne had begun seeing another young man, Alexis, her co-worker. He didn't know the details, but the idea alone was enough to push him into a dangerous emotional spiral. He felt humiliated, abandoned, and replaced. To him, Daphne hadn't simply left, she had betrayed him. Rejection was something he had never been able to process. Now his agitation grew deeper, darker, and more volatile. Driven by anger and wounded pride, Anthony recorded a video message, posted it online. The video lasted several minutes. In it, he accused Daphne of destroying his life, said she had used him, manipulated him, and thrown him away. He insisted he loved her more than anyone ever would, yet she supposedly didn't appreciate it. While he made no explicit threats, the emotional volatility was unmistakable. He looked furious, unhinged. When Daphne's family discovered the video, they were horrified. Her father couldn't understand why the platform had not removed it immediately. To see the man who terrified his daughter publicly attacking her, without consequence, was deeply unsettling. But more importantly, the video exposed the truth. Anthony was in a dangerous mental state, driven by obsession, jealousy. In the final days before the tragedy, fear hovered over everything. Daphne sensed that Anthony wanted to confront her, but she tried not to show it. She didn't want to frighten her parents or burden them with her anxiety. She believed that staying calm, not reacting, and keeping her distance would prevent him from escalating. She didn't know how far he was willing to go. On the cold, snowy night of March 2017, Anthony made his move. Around 11 o'clock p.m., he left his home in Saint-Jean-sur-Richelieu and began walking toward Boucherville, where Daphne was staying with her father. He had no car, so he trudged through freezing temperatures and unplowed streets on foot. The walk took nearly 2 hours. This wasn't an impulsive decision. Around 1 o'clock a.m., he arrived at the property. Keeping out of sight, he slipped into the back seat of a car parked in the driveway. It wasn't Daphne's own vehicle. It was her mother's car, lent to her while hers was being repaired. Anthony knew she would drive this car to work in the morning. Around 10:30 a.m., on March 21, 2017, Daphne quietly stepped out of her father's house to head to work. She walked toward the car her mother had lent her, only to freeze when she opened the door. Anthony was sitting in the back seat, motionless, waiting. He said he only wanted to talk. He repeated that they needed to clear things up, refusing to leave the car. Shocked and already running late for her shift, Daphne tried calmly asking him to get out, but he wouldn't move. Unable to force him out and wanting to avoid escalation, she got behind the wheel, drove, with Anthony silently riding along in the back seat. He didn't touch her. He didn't raise his voice. But Daphne felt the tension, his hidden intentions. When they arrived at the small grocery store where she worked, Daphne quickly got out of the car and went inside. Anthony followed her. Her co-workers immediately noticed his behavior. Tense, fixated, standing too close, watching her every move. The atmosphere grew increasingly unsettling, concerned. Her colleagues called the police. Officers arrived shortly afterward and confirmed that Anthony's behavior was intrusive, worrisome. They separated him from Daphne, escorted him outside, and spoke with him privately. He didn't show aggression, but he was clearly emotionally unstable. When officers asked if she wanted to file a complaint, Daphne declined. She insisted she wasn't afraid, that he hadn't laid a hand on her, hadn't threatened her, that she didn't want to escalate the situation. She told them she had everything under control. So the police issued only a verbal warning. Anthony then called a taxi and left. Afterward, Daphne returned to her shift, exhausted but determined to keep going. She wanted to believe it was over, that this was just another unpleasant episode she would eventually move past. She didn't consider herself in danger, but for Anthony, that morning was not the end. It was preparation. He had not let go. Over the next hours, Daphne stuck to her strategy of silent distance, thinking that if she ignored him and refused to react, he would eventually give up. The next day, March 22, 2017, Daphne decided to go to Anthony's apartment to collect the last of her belongings. What drove her to act was fear for her pets, her cat and 2 lizards. She worried he might neglect them or harm them out of spite. Before leaving, she went to the police station. She explained her situation, told them she needed to pick up her things, and admitted she didn't feel safe. Because Anthony was already known to police for instability, the officer she spoke to strongly advised her not to go alone. A female officer was assigned to quietly accompany her, following in a separate vehicle so as not to provoke Anthony but still close enough to intervene if necessary. They arrived at the building around noon. As Daphne entered the building, the policewoman waited outside. After waiting longer than expected without seeing Daphne return, the policewoman quickly followed. However, she mistakenly entered the wrong section of the complex. After several minutes of double-checking the address, she finally found the correct entrance and floor. Unfortunately, this delay had serious consequences. When she got to the apartment door, everything was silent. She knocked, but no one answered. Then, she saw a shadow move behind the glass, and a man's voice said, "Arrest me." The door opened. Anthony stood there, expression blank, hands soaked in blood. "This isn't my blood," he said flatly. The officer immediately ordered him to step out. He complied without resistance. His demeanor was eerily calm. The officer called for backup and an ambulance, then entered the apartment. It was silent inside. Near the stairs, she found Daphne's body on the floor. She was dead. Later, forensic analysis revealed she had suffered 15 stab wounds, most concentrated around her chest and neck. Her throat had also been slashed. One of the wounds alone would have been fatal. The rest reflected a frenzy, the kind of violent outburst committed by someone in a state of overwhelming rage. The time wasted finding the right building and entrance led to tragic consequences. Although law enforcement acted according to procedure, this situation highlighted a critical reality. When confronting a potentially dangerous individual, even a minor delay can have fatal consequences. The crime scene clearly showed what happened. Blood was splattered throughout the apartment. Bloody handprints marked the leg of a table. A partial shoe print smeared the lower portion of the door. The attacker didn't try to hide anything. Anthony was arrested immediately and taken to the police station. There, he confessed without hesitation. He did not deny what he had done, nor did he attempt to justify it. He said only that he had crossed a line and that it happened fast. He provided no additional explanation, nor did he show any remorse. Physically, he appeared stable. He had no visible injuries and declined medical treatment. As interrogations began, news of the killing reached Daphne's family. Her father was the first to receive the call. asking him to come to the police station. When he arrived, the truth was revealed. His daughter was dead. The shock was overwhelming. Daphne's mother collapsed emotionally, struggling to process what she was hearing. Her father sat in disbelief, unable to comprehend that the danger they had feared for months had now become reality. They learned that Anthony had confessed and was in custody. The family was initially instructed to stay away from the crime scene while technicians worked. Her father refused. He insisted on seeing his daughter, an image that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The investigation progressed quickly after Anthony's arrest. With his confession on record and the evidence overwhelming, the case proceeded to trial in 2019. He was ultimately convicted and sentenced to life in prison, with no eligibility for parole for the first 18 years. But public attention soon shifted toward a controversial aspect of the legal process. Prosecutors and defense attorneys reached a plea deal, reducing the charge to second-degree murder on the grounds that premeditation couldn't be conclusively proven. Under Canadian law, this meant the killing was classified as intentional but not planned. For Daphne's family, this was devastating. Her father firmly believed the crime was premeditated. He pointed to Anthony's actions, waiting for her in the car, tracking her movements, posting disturbing messages online, and committing the murder within minutes of her entering the apartment. None of this, he argued, aligned with a spontaneous crime of passion. To him, these were unmistakable signs of preparation, of first-degree murder. After the funeral, the family sought support from the Crime Victims' Compensation Office to cope with the emotional and financial impact of their loss. But their initial application was rejected. According to the agency, since the parents had not been physically harmed themselves, they were not considered direct victims under the law and were therefore not eligible for compensation. The family appealed the decision, and after a lengthy process, the appeal was successful. The original decision was overturned. The parents received some compensation, primarily to help with the costs of psychological counseling and lost wages. While the amount of money was not large, it marked an acknowledgement that the system recognized the weight of their loss. At the same time, public attention turned sharply toward the question of police responsibility. The actions of the officers involved on the day of the murder were scrutinized in both media and community discussions. One officer, the one tasked with escorting Daphne to collect her belongings, had mistakenly entered the wrong building and lost several crucial minutes. The second officer, the one who spoke to Daphne on the day of the workplace incident, did not insist on formal accompaniment, even though Anthony's escalating behavior clearly warranted greater protection. Both officers were summoned for a professional ethics review. After internal hearings, neither faced disciplinary consequences. Officially, their actions did not constitute a breach of protocol. For Daphne's family, and especially her father, the outcome was enraging. He publicly condemned the decision, stating that the police had gravely underestimated the risk. Anthony was already known to authorities as emotionally unstable and potentially dangerous. His stalking, his obsessive messages, the online video, and his aggressive behavior at Daphne's workplace were unmistakable warning signs. In the father's view, every one of those signs had been minimized until it was too late. For Daphne's loved ones, the pain has not faded with time. They lost a daughter in the most violent way imaginable, and then had to fight for acknowledgement that her death was not an unavoidable tragedy, but a preventable one. No link in the chain, police, prosecutors, or social services, took responsibility. Daphne's story became a stark symbol in Quebec of how the line between psychological abuse and imminent danger is too often ignored. It is a reminder of how hesitation, procedural gaps, and institutional subjectivity can create deadly consequences. On a peaceful autumn day in November 2004, in Tampa, Florida, a horrific tragedy occurred, claiming the life of Katrina Ann Katie Froschle, a beautiful, talented, and passionate 25-year-old woman. She disappeared without a trace while working in the disaster area left by a major hurricane season. A few days later, her body was found. She had been brutally beaten with a pipe and then thrown into the river to conceal the crime. Who killed her, and why? Katrina Ann Katie Froschle was born on October 1, 1979, in Fort Collins, Colorado, United States, the eldest child and the only daughter in her family. Her mother was a nurse, and her father, an attorney who later became a prosecutor. His career required frequent relocations. Shortly after Katie's birth, the family moved to Lakewood, Colorado, before eventually settling across the country in Tierra Verde, Florida, a peaceful, picturesque community by the water. Katie attended high school there, quickly joined the swim team, showing strong athletic ability. In addition to swimming, she loved softball and basketball. At home, she enjoyed cooking and adored cats. Everyone who knew her could attest to her deep affection for them. She couldn't pass one without stopping to give it attention. In 1998, Katie graduated from high school and enrolled at Florida State University. 4 years later, she earned a bachelor's degree in finance and risk management, insurance, a field she genuinely loved. Always active, she became a member of the Kappa Alpha Theta sorority, a prestigious organization she was proud to represent. After graduating in 2002, Katie began working for Florida Farm Bureau Insurance as a claims adjuster. She quickly became known for her professionalism and compassion. Her job required her to accept and process insurance claims, which often included on-site inspections of damaged properties. Around 2 years before earning her degree, Katie began dating a young man. But romance wasn't her priority. Although they dated for 4 years, the relationship eventually ended in 2004. By the summer of that year, Katie was a 25-year-old single woman. Focused fully on her career, it was an incredibly demanding time for insurance professionals. 4 major hurricanes, Charlie, Francis, Ivan, and Jeannie, struck Florida within 6 weeks, causing more than $1 billion in damage. Insurance companies were overwhelmed, and adjusters like Katie had a crushing workload that stretched on for months. For Katie, this meant countless visits to clients' homes to assess structural damage and determine compensation. Friday, November 12, 2004, started out like any other workday. She was scheduled to inspect a rental property to evaluate roof damage. Her manager told her the tenant might not be home. But it didn't matter. She didn't need to enter the house. The damage could be assessed from the street. Around noon, Katie's mother, Jeffrey, expected her usual call. They typically spoke several times a day, chatting about little things, family matters, daily life, or simply to check in. But that day was different. Katie did not call. When her mother phoned her, there was no answer. She knew Katie was in the middle of work, so she assumed she was just busy and thought little of it at first. But the hours passed, and Katie never called back. Something completely out of character. Her mom tried to brush off her growing concern, telling herself that Katie must be exhausted after weeks of hurricane-related fieldwork. Or perhaps she had turned off her phone to focus on inspections. As the night went on and calls continued to go unanswered, her mother grew increasingly uneasy. She thought perhaps Katie had forgotten her cell phone at home. When the dinner hour came and passed with still no response, she called Emmy, one of Katie's closest friends, the only friend whose number she had. Emmy delivered troubling news. Katie didn't show up for dinner as planned. Her co-workers had tried calling as well. With no success, Panic was beginning to take shape. Emmy, just as alarmed, immediately offered to help search for her. She and Katie were extremely close. Close enough that Emmy had a spare key to Katie's apartment. Emmy headed there to check on things. Katie's car wasn't in the driveway. When Emmy knocked on the door, no one answered, so she used her key. After checking the rooms, she didn't notice anything suspicious, except that Katie's cat's bowl was empty, indicating it hadn't been filled for quite some time. Caring for her pets was a top priority for Katie, so it was unusual for her to neglect feeding the cat. There was no new information until the next morning, so Katie's family decided to report her missing to law enforcement. The police immediately took the matter seriously and launched a search operation. A bulletin was issued with all the details describing not only Katie but also her car. By this point, it became clear that the maroon Chevrolet Impala was also missing. Detectives carefully examined Katie's apartment. They found no signs of forced entry, so they surmised she was either attacked by someone she knew, to whom she opened the door, or perhaps she had left on her own accord. They checked on her ex-boyfriend, as Katie's friends had heard about problems in their relationship. Several witnesses recalled that Katie's ex-boyfriend was against the breakup and had repeatedly shown up at places she frequented. However, no formal allegations of stalking had been made. When investigators spoke with the ex-boyfriend, he admitted to making several attempts to rekindle their relationship, but insisted those attempts had ceased long before her disappearance. This line of inquiry was abandoned when he provided a confirmed alibi. Reconstructing the sequence of events, it was discovered that Katie's friends and colleagues last saw her just before she was scheduled to go to a house to assess the extent of the damage. The job was scheduled for noon and wasn't expected to last more than an hour. After that, she didn't contact anyone again. Detectives contacted the insurance agency and easily obtained the address of a house in Tampa. In a high-crime neighborhood, this was a glaring red flag, as it was a picturesque but rather dangerous location. According to Emmy, when Katie was in the area near the property, she got lost and called her for directions. The two friends continued talking until Katie arrived at the house. Emmy hadn't heard anything suspicious, at least until her friend announced she'd found the house and that a tall, young man was heading her way. Afterward, they said goodbye, and she hung up. It seemed like something bad could have happened to Katie here, and this lead needed to be followed up. When law enforcement arrived at the address, they found Jason Funk and Pamela Hintz inside. It was a young couple who had recently moved in and were now living in the house. They said they hadn't seen any woman matching Katie's description, nor had they seen her car. According to Jason, they had moved into the house just 3 days before Katie's disappearance, but only moved their belongings in the day before detectives arrived. From their words, it seemed like no one had been there the day Katie arrived. Curiously, Jason and Pamela denied any roof damage. They'd never discussed the matter with the landlords. They hadn't realized an insurance adjuster was supposed to come and assess the situation. It all sounded odd. Katie's family continued their own impromptu investigation. Led by her father, a prosecutor, they began combing the area around the house where she was last seen. Katie's car was found in a parking lot about a kilometer away. Her parents immediately noticed that the car was unlocked and the keys were in the ignition. This could be seen as a warning sign. Katie's parents contacted the police to report the vehicle. The police found a crucial piece of evidence: her wallet. All cash and bank cards were missing. It was clear something sinister had happened in the car. So forensic experts arrived to conduct a thorough inspection and collect evidence. They found an empty document envelope in the door compartment. There were no bloodstains or obvious sources of DNA that could be linked to anyone else inside the car. Investigators hypothesized that the attack on Katie could have occurred elsewhere, and the car was moved to the parking lot to conceal the crime. If this were the case, the perpetrator would have left fingerprints on the steering wheel while driving the car. This theory proved correct. 2 sets of fingerprints were found on the steering wheel. One belonged to Katie, and the other was too small, incomplete. and partially smudged. A full analysis was required to determine the identity. Law enforcement began interviewing nearby workers who might have witnessed the car being left in the parking lot. A local cleaner confirmed that he saw a man abandoning the car early in the morning. This detail attracted his attention because there were no other cars parked there yet. After leaving the car, the man simply walked down the street, and no one had touched the car since. The witness did not see any passengers or other individuals with him. The driver was alone. The witness provided a good description of the suspect, allowing authorities to obtain a reasonably detailed profile. Given the time frame, the suspect likely didn't have much time to drive around the area. Therefore, authorities decided to thoroughly search the area between the house where Katie was last seen and the parking lot where her car was found. The most obvious place to hide the body between these 2 points is the Hillsborough River, which flowed just 100 meters from the house Katie was supposed to be inspecting. A search of the river area was initiated. As it was getting dark, one of the officers spotted something light-colored on the surface of the water. He shone his flashlight and found a bra a few meters from the riverbank. When shown the item, Katie's mother recognized it as her daughter's underwear. From that moment on, the investigation was confirmed to be on the right track. The next morning, search teams redoubled their efforts. Less than an hour later, in daylight, Katie's body was discovered. Identification was straightforward. She had been thrown into the water, partially naked. Based on this, detectives suspected she had been abused and then drowned to conceal the crime. She had been in the water for approximately 30 hours, which could have damaged or destroyed some of the evidence. There was no time to waste. The body was immediately sent to the lab for an autopsy. The medical examiner determined that Katie had suffered blunt force trauma concentrated on the back of her head. It was believed that these injuries were the cause of death, not drowning. While examining the blunt force injuries, they noted the unusual shape of the hematomas. Katie may have been beaten with some kind of instrument or metal object, but the exact nature of the weapon remained unknown. Experts determined that the body had barely moved after being thrown into the water, as the downstream flow was blocked due to repair work. The remains were located very close to the house where Katie had been called for the inspection. This strongly suggested that the crime had been committed there or nearby. When law enforcement officers spoke with the residents of the house again, Jason and Pamola, they reiterated that they had not seen Katie and had witnessed nothing unusual. They suggested talking to the owner of the house they were renting. Katie's father, along with other family members, continued their own investigation. He decided to speak with the owner himself to gather more information. The owner claimed that he had arranged a meeting with Katie to assess the damage, but had never met her in person. The discussion had taken place over the phone, and he had informed the tenants about the planned inspection. This contradicted the tenants' statements. Something was clearly wrong. Now they had to figure out who was lying. Initially, it was believed that Pamela might also have been involved, but she later provided a confirmed alibi. She was in a nearby suburb when it happened. Jason, however, was a different story. He was fumbling with his testimony. This seemed highly suspicious, especially since he had nothing to prove. The investigation also revealed that someone had made several attempts to use Katie's card, but one attempt to use the payment method was successful. The payment took place at a grocery store. Luckily, law enforcement officers had video surveillance of the cash registers there. After requesting the footage, they were able to identify the person who used the card. He was a tall white man, matching the description given by the parking lot cleaner. A store employee even remembered him, saying the person who used the card had lied and said it belonged to his girlfriend. His most foolish act was leaving his real signature on the check. He signed it as Jason Funk. Now, his suspicious behavior when talking to investigators and his denial of being in the house when Katie arrived to inspect the damage were completely explained. When Jason's alleged lie was uncovered, a search warrant was obtained for Jason's home and belongings. Jason greeted officers at the door. He was immediately asked how he could have used Katie's bank card. He was unable to comment. Pamela was horrified by what was happening. Once she learned everything, she began to cooperate more willingly with the investigation. According to her, on the day Katie disappeared, Jason was acting strangely. He left for a few hours right around the time the inspector was supposed to arrive. When he returned, he was very agitated and demanded that she not say anything about his trip. Now she feared that Jason might have made her an accomplice to a serious crime. Forensic investigators thoroughly examined the area inside and outside the house. Katie's business card was found inside. A recently used fire pit was discovered in the backyard. It contained carelessly discarded items that had not even completely burned. Scraps resembling parts of a carpet were recovered, as well as a charred belt buckle. The rest of the belt was completely burned, but the metal buckle was taken for comparison with Katie's belongings. Katie's mother confirmed that she had such a belt, but the buckle wasn't unique. Furthermore, the remains of a document were discovered, and the serial number was even recovered. As it turned out, these were Katie's documents. Naturally, this became one of the most powerful pieces of evidence against Jason. The rooms were also not in order. In addition to marks indicating a struggle, bloodstains were found on the door leading to the backyard. Spatter was also left on the living room ceiling. Everything was collected for further analysis, but it would take more time. Detectives believed Katie was attacked in the living room after Jason lured her inside. He may have asked her to sign documents or offered her a drink of water. After the attack, Katie was dragged to the river through the back door, leaving bloodstains. Jason was unable to comment on all of the detectives' questions about the evidence. He seemed increasingly withdrawn. However, after a while, he managed to concoct a flimsy excuse for Katie's bank card. He claimed he found it on a shelf above the oven in the house. He couldn't explain how it got there and admitted to using someone else's card. While forensic experts were examining the crime scene, one of them noticed a car muffler in the corner of the living room. They observed that the mounting bracket on the side of the muffler closely resembled the imprint left by what they suspected was the murder weapon on Katie's head. Further testing revealed that the muffler could have been used to bludgeon Katie to death. A major problem was that the muffler had been thoroughly cleaned, leaving no fingerprints or blood spatter on the surface. The only option was to carefully measure the mounting bracket, and then they confirmed that its shape and size were identical to the mark on Katie's head. This became further compelling evidence pointing towards Jason. All the evidence pointed to Jason's involvement, but he stubbornly denied any guilt in the murder. He even concocted an alibi, claiming he was jet skiing along the river when the incident occurred. However, this claim was impossible to verify as no one had seen him. Furthermore, he was caught in a lie, making the whole story implausible. They decided to take Jason to the station for questioning. Pamela was allowed to accompany him. They were even left alone to talk, their phones wiretapped. Of course, Jason immediately began sharing his experiences with Pamela. He denied involvement in the murder but repeatedly mentioned being suspected of hitting Katie in the head with his muffler. Intriguingly, he hadn't yet been told about the murder weapon. His behavior was becoming increasingly suspicious. Despite Jason's denial of guilt, he was charged with first-degree murder and arrested. Later, bank card fraud and attempting to obstruct the investigation were added to the charges. The list of incriminating errors didn't end there. Detectives asked Jason for his Nike sneakers before sending him to jail. To their surprise, the lab immediately found blood spatter on them belonging to Katie. Further analysis confirmed that Jason had arrived for questioning wearing the same shoes he had worn when he committed the crime. The lab results from the envelope and other items found in Katie's car arrived. Although Jason denied being in the stolen car, fingerprint analysis proved he was. A fingerprint matching Jason's was found, exposing him as a liar. Even in the face of overwhelming evidence, Jason continued to deny involvement in Katie's murder, further fueling the growing concern and seeming to mock the Froschla family's grief. His persistence necessitated looking at more circumstantial evidence. A background check revealed Jason had a history of assaulting women and had already served time for abuse, suggesting a motive for the attack. His first victim was interviewed. She believed she miraculously survived his attack, stating that Jason was extremely cruel and that what happened to Katie couldn't have been a coincidence, adding that besides the abuse, he had planned to take her money. The Funk family was going through a difficult time, as shortly before the murder, Jason had lost his job as a car mechanic. Pamela and Jason had spent all their savings on a deposit for a new house and had to pay about $1,000 a month in rent. They were in serious financial trouble, and Jason solved the problem in the most brutal way possible. However, he couldn't even use the card, managing only to buy food. 6 months after his arrest, all forensic tests were completed, including DNA testing of blood and skin cells. All of this implicated 27-year-old Jason in the brutal murder. The man continued to maintain his innocence, even appearing on several television programs, alternately claiming he was wrongly convicted and hinting that he had been framed by enemies. However, the evidence against him was overwhelming, making a death sentence highly probable. To avoid this, Jason pleaded guilty to a lesser charge. Jason Funk pleaded guilty to first-degree murder, intentional abuse, armed robbery, and banned substances-related charges. As a result, in March 2005, Jason Funk was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. However, even after this, Jason continued to deny involvement in the crime, repeatedly stating that he confessed simply because he didn't want to die by lethal injection. Against the backdrop of overwhelming evidence confirming his guilt, this all sounded unconvincing. The night in Swindon was calm, but that tranquility was soon shattered. A young woman named Cian Emma O'Callaghan, known for being quiet and kind, stepped out of a familiar bar and disappeared without a trace. There were no witnesses, no sounds of distress, and no leads to follow. Only the footage of her last moments remained, followed by an unsettling silence that left many questions unanswered. In a town where people believed nothing bad could happen, Cian's disappearance turned life upside down. Her friends were frantic, families were devastated, and the police found themselves caught off guard by a search that would evolve into a prolonged nightmare, revealing the chilling reality behind a seemingly ordinary man. As the smallest details began to emerge, the police realized they were no longer dealing with a simple missing person case. They were confronting a dark reality that had long been lurking beneath the surface. Cian Emma O'Callaghan was born on June 3, 1988, in Swindon, Wiltshire, and grew up in a close-knit family. After her parents separated, she lived with her mother, Elaine Pickford, and took care of her younger siblings Liam, Laura, and Aidan. Those who know Cian describe her as kind, thoughtful, and always willing to help others. She avoids trouble and conflict, and her friends admire her for being a good listener, bringing peace to their lives. She longs for a simple life with a stable job, a home of her own, and eventually a family. After graduating, Cian realized that the traditional academic path wasn't for her. She decided to work in the administrative department of a local business and quickly established herself as a responsible and dedicated person. She was known for being the first to arrive and the last to leave. Cian had a stable personal life. She lived with her boyfriend, Kevin Reap, 26. In the suburbs of central Swindon, Kevin worked in information technology. They often had gatherings with friends and family, and occasionally went on holidays to the coast. In recent weeks, her life had been normal work, time with friends, and weekend outings. Everything seemed peaceful and safe. Swindon, like many other English towns, had a slow and familiar pace of life. Neighbors were generally friendly. Shops closed early, and the streets were quiet after nightfall. Such a peaceful setting seemed unlikely for anything shocking to occur. On the evening of March 18, 2011, Cyan went out with friends to Suju, a club in downtown Swindon. The night was typical, filled with music, dancing, and chatting. Surveillance footage shows them entering the club just before midnight. At 2:52 a.m., Cyan leaves alone, telling her friends she is walking home. Her apartment, shared with Kevin, is about half a mile away. Cameras capture her walking down the street and turning a corner. But then she disappears from view. That is the last confirmed sighting of her. From that moment, there are no more leads. Kevin attempts to contact her several times by phone but gets no reply. Assuming she is still out with friends, he goes to bed. By morning, it becomes clear that she never returned home. After several unsuccessful attempts to reach her, Kevin calls the police to report her missing at 9:45 a.m. On March 19, officers begin searching the area where Cyan was last seen. Unbeknownst to them, these first hours would prove crucial in what would become one of Swindon's most high-profile cases. On the morning of March 19, 2011, less than 6 hours after Cyan went missing, the Wiltshire police made their first official response. A specialized investigation unit was quickly formed, consisting of missing persons officers, surveillance analysts, and forensic teams, all tasked with tracing Cyan's steps from the moment she left the club to her expected home arrival. Officers began scouring shops along High Street, collecting video footage, and interviewing staff. The footage clearly captured Cyan leaving the club and walking alone. But she never appeared on the next camera in the sequence. The distance between those two locations was short, but 32 minutes later, her phone signaled from a location nearly 12 meters away, near the Savernake Forest. This detail is suspicious because it's highly unlikely Cyan could have moved to that location in such a short amount of time. By midday, police leaders had issued their first public statement on the investigation, led by Chief Inspector Steve Fulcher. He appealed to the public for information, emphasizing that the incident could involve a serious threat. At the same time, searches began in the area several miles around the club and the roads leading out of Swindon. Many volunteers began arriving in town, printing and distributing flyers with Cyan's picture at bus stops, shops, and in cars. By nightfall, several hundred community members joined the search, and within 24 hours, nearly 400 people were working alongside the police. On March 20, an anonymous benefactor offered a £20,000 reward for any information that could help find Cyan. Law enforcement increased patrols, set up temporary headquarters, and launched a hotline. However, investigators faced numerous difficulties. The camera network had only captured part of Cyan's route. There were no witnesses, no signs of a struggle, and no personal items were found. The only lead was Cyan's phone, which had gone silent. The town was filled with anxious anticipation, as reporters gathered in Swindon's main square and national television began broadcasting daily updates. With media pressure increasing, rumors began to circulate, ranging from a robbery gone wrong to theories about Cyan running away. Her family and friends spoke out to refute these claims. Her boyfriend, Kevin, appeared on camera, urgently appealing for her safe return. Authorities worked to control the flow of information, but attention was rapidly growing. For a town like Swindon, known for its tranquility and safety, this situation was shocking. Within hours, it became the center of a national investigation. With each passing hour without answers, anxiety escalated. By the end of the first 24 hours, detectives possessed only fragments of information: a possible route, a time frame, and the last known location of Cyan's phone. The rest remained a mystery, while the public remained hopeful that Cyan would return home safely. investigators started to realize that the situation might be more complicated than just a missing persons case. A few days after Sion's disappearance, the investigation made a significant breakthrough. After reviewing hours of city surveillance footage, detectives noticed something unusual. A dark Toyota Avensis appeared in the area where Sion was last tracked. The timestamp matched the time Sion left the center of Swindon. The vehicle slowed down, stopped briefly, and then continued toward the Eastern Highway. This became a crucial lead for investigators. Running the license plates linked the car to Christopher Halliwell, a 47-year-old resident of Swindon. He was listed as a licensed taxi driver with a mostly clean record. Aside from a few minor infractions, he seemed like an ordinary person, working nights, living with his partner, Heather, and raising 3 sons. Neighbors and colleagues described him as quiet and reliable. However, nothing about him immediately aroused suspicion. Police brought Christopher in for questioning. He claimed that on the night Sion went missing, he worked until around 1:30 a.m. before heading home. However, surveillance footage showed his car in the same streets where Sion was last seen. When officers pointed this out, Christopher began to change his story, stumbling over his timeline and eventually suggesting he might have just been passing through. Despite these inconsistencies, there was no direct evidence linking him to any crime. There were no signs of a struggle, and no items belonging to Sion were found in his car, leaving police with no choice but to let him go. However, Detective Superintendent Steve Fulcher had a strong feeling that Christopher wasn't merely a bystander. The inconsistencies in his story and his nervous demeanor raised significant red flags. As a result, the investigative team decided to proceed with covert surveillance. Christopher was placed under constant observation, documenting every move, interaction, and stop. His phone was tapped, and a GPS tracker was secretly installed on his car. For several days, Christopher's routine appeared normal as he went to work, filled up on gas, and did some shopping. But this normality started to raise concerns for investigators, as he seemed overly cautious, avoiding conversations and taking unfamiliar routes as if aware he was being watched. The surveillance operation continued, with detectives closely tracking Christopher's movements. On March 24, 2011, he left his home in his Toyota Avensis, stopping at a gas station to refuel. He drove to the outskirts of Swindon and into a rural area without cameras. He parked his car near a wooded area, removed a bundle from the trunk, and laid out the fabric seat covers on the ground. He soaked them in gasoline and set them on fire, an act that was recorded on video by officers observing from a distance. The fire quickly consumed the material, leaving only ashes. This was a critical moment for investigators, as it clearly indicated an attempt to destroy evidence. They immediately ordered his arrest. Christopher was taken into custody in a supermarket parking lot shortly after returning from his trip. He did not resist, claiming he was merely changing the upholstery. He was brought directly to Detective Superintendent Steve Fulcher, who was leading the investigation. Normally, the suspect would be taken to the station and have the right to an attorney. But Steve knew they needed to act quickly to find Sion alive. He made a controversial choice to drive Christopher to the hills near Oxford to get him to talk. Inside the car, the conversation was tense. Steve made no threats or promises, but directly questioned Sion's whereabouts. After hours of silence, Christopher finally agreed to lead Steve to where her body was located. At this point, the investigation shifted from missing persons to a violent crime. Steve was aware that he was stepping outside standard procedures. There was no formal interview, no lawyer, and Christopher hadn't been taken to the station. However, he made that decision knowing that following protocol might have prevented Christopher from confessing. In the following hours, Steve continued to take the necessary steps for the arrest. However, these decisions, while bringing progress to the case, could potentially hinder his personal career. On March 24, 2011, following Christopher's confession, police units began moving east of Swindon toward Savernake Forest. Christopher indicated a small patch of ground near a rural road as the location of Sian Emma O'Callaghan's body. Detective Steve recorded the coordinates and notified his team. Forensic experts soon arrived, sealed off the area, set up portable lighting, and began their work immediately. They meticulously excavated the site layer by layer to preserve any evidence. After several hours, they found a human body partially wrapped in fabric just below the surface. Although formal identification would follow, the investigative team was absolutely convinced it was Sian. An autopsy performed by the Wiltshire Forensic Unit confirmed the cause of death. There were signs of trauma from a heavy object impacting the back of the head and several stab wounds on the body. There were no signs of serious assault, suggesting the attack was sudden and brief. Sian may have lost her life shortly after getting into the car. The atmosphere at the site was heavy with silence as the team worked, each member fully aware of the seriousness of the situation. For them, it was more than just another case. It was personal. Steve stood by quietly as the body was recovered from the ground, feeling justified in his earlier decision to bend protocol. Without that choice, they might never have located her. That evening, news breaks across the media. In Swindon, a public mourning begins as people gather outside Suju nightclub, where Sian was last seen alive. They leave flowers and light candles at the entrance, and heartfelt messages appear along the railings. For this small, quiet town, it's a tragedy. The story of a young woman who disappeared just minutes from home has a heartbreaking conclusion. Police confirm that the body found is Sian Emma O'Callaghan, 22, a local resident. The investigation now shifts focus. It's no longer a missing persons case but a major crime investigation. Christopher Hallowell is arrested, and Detective Steve prepares to document the confession that became a key breakthrough in the case. Savernake Forest, previously just a beautiful area, now symbolizes loss, the location where a young woman's life ended and where a significant investigation began. When the investigative team realized the seriousness of the situation, Christopher told Detective Steve that there was another body. He didn't name it, only saying that the incident had happened a long time ago. Investigators quickly start searching a nearby area only a few hundred yards from where Sian was found. Forensic teams discover bones and clothing remnants. DNA testing confirms the remains belong to 20-year-old Becky Godden Edwards, who went missing 8 years prior in Swindon. At the time of her disappearance, there were no alarm bells. It was thought she had run away from home. Becky's story was tragic. During her teenage years, she battled addiction and was frequently in treatment. But one day, she left rehab and never returned. Over the years, she became unhoused and lived on the streets. Her mother, Karen Edwards, searched tirelessly for her, but every effort was in vain. Now police are telling her that Becky has been found. For Karen, the news is both heartbreaking and provides closure. After 8 years of uncertainty, forensic experts determine that Becky died due to violent actions, but the lengthy time since then means they cannot specify an exact cause. Christopher confessed to the crime, but could not recall the date or details of the incident. Investigators soon realized they were not facing an isolated case, but possibly a series of crimes involving one man. With 2 victims years apart, police began to review old missing persons cases for any connections to Christopher. For Becky's family, it marked the end of a long nightmare. For detectives, it shifted the focus from searching for one missing woman to investigating a potential serial offender. In the fall of 2012, Christopher Hallowell's trial took place at Bristol Crown Court, charged with the murder of Sian Emma O'Callaghan. Initially, he pleaded not guilty, but months later, he confessed. The jury accepted his confession, and on October 19, 2012, he was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole for at least 25 years. However, the case concerning Becky did not proceed to court. prosecutors chose not to use Christopher's confession due to legal procedural issues. Under UK law, any statement made without legal counsel present is considered inadmissible. Detective Steve Fulcher's decision to interrogate Christopher outside a police station without an attorney jeopardized the case, sparking a national debate about police practices and the rights of suspects. Despite this, the families of the victims supported Steve, crediting him for uncovering the truth. Steve himself faced an internal investigation and ultimately received a disciplinary warning, leading to his resignation from the police force. He sacrificed his position, career, and reputation. While his actions led to the discovery of both women's remains, public opinion was divided. Some argued that justice should supersede legal technicalities, while others believed Steve had set a dangerous precedent by disregarding established law. Meanwhile, Christopher, who was convicted of one crime, is still serving his sentence and remains silent regarding the second charge. It wasn't until 2016 that law enforcement reopened the trial thanks to additional evidence, including DNA analysis and materials from the crime scene. Prosecutors were able to reopen the case of Becky without needing a confession this time. The jury reviewed the evidence and delivered a clear verdict: guilty. On September 19, 2016, Christopher Halliwell was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, ensuring he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. The case, which began with the disappearance of a young woman in a quiet English town, ended with 2 life sentences, forever changing 2 lives. After the trials, the lives of those involved took different paths. Detective Steve Fulcher, whose efforts led to solving both cases, was found guilty of misconduct. His choice to question Christopher without an attorney present violated police investigative procedures. Consequently, Steve faced disciplinary measures, lost his rank, and resigned from the Wiltshire Police Department, ending a 20-year career where he had risen from patrol officer to lead investigator. This particular case, the Sian Emma O'Callaghan case, ultimately cost him everything. After leaving the force, Steve moved to Somalia to work as a consultant for a private security firm. Ironically, his decision to break protocol was pivotal in solving crimes that could have remained unresolved. Without that bold, albeit improper, action, the victims might not have been discovered, and the perpetrator could have continued to harm others. Steve prioritized justice over procedure, and the victims' families did not turn against him. Sian's mother publicly thanked him for allowing them to say goodbye to her daughter. Karen Edwards, Becky Godden's mother, defended Steve as well, stating that without him, she would never have learned the truth about her daughter's fate. To them, he remained a hero despite the system's judgment. Meanwhile, Christopher continues to serve his life sentence. His name has become a symbol of one of the darkest cases in modern British history. This case has had a significant impact on the legal proceedings and public psychology, leading to many debates about the boundaries between what is legal and what is right. For the town of Swindon, where it all began, this story became a symbol of loss and broken trust, illustrating how quickly a familiar world can unravel. This narrative is not just about crime. It emphasizes the true cost of uncovering the truth. Some lost their lives, others lost their careers and reputations, but their actions ultimately provided answers that 2 families had desperately sought for years. At 17, Madison Skimmets thought her greatest pain was just a broken teenage romance. Little did she know that, for someone else, the word breakup would become the pretext for extreme obsession, hatred, and violence, and that the best decision of her life, leaving a toxic relationship, almost cost her everything. In just a few short minutes in a parking lot, Madison was stabbed 17 times. Her mother used her own body to shield her, while a stranger bravely rushed in to prevent the tragedy. Blood was spilled, screams rang out, and from that moment, the fates of many took a different turn. This is not just the story of a brutal attack. This is a journey from obsession to miracle, from despair to extraordinary willpower, and a chilling warning about the terrible price of ignored obsession. What happened on June 3, 2023, and how did a girl who was declared never to walk again manage to stand up, step by step, to the astonishment of the world? Madison Skimitz is an American teenager living in Ponte Vedra Beach, Florida. She attended Ponte Vedra High School, where she was known for being friendly and outgoing. With a bright future ahead, like many of her peers, she also experienced the ups and downs of first love. In late 2022, Madison started dating Spencer Pearson. For 6 months, they were together like any other teenage couple. But by April 2023, Madison realized the relationship was unhealthy and decided to end it. She never imagined that this action would lead to a series of traumatic and violent events that nearly took everything from her. Spencer refused to accept the breakup. From April through early June, he began stalking and harassing Madison. He kept sending her harassing messages and even showed up at places she often went to. Those actions showed that he had no intention of letting her live her life in peace. The harassment escalated, causing Madison and her family to fear for her safety. This was no longer the impulsive reaction of a heartbroken teenager after a breakup, but rather disturbing and potentially dangerous behavior. Madison confided in friends about her fears, and her mother, Jacqueline Rogue, grew increasingly alarmed. In late April, Spencer's mental health deteriorated further. He posted a disturbing photo on Snapchat showing a tie around his neck and tears on his face. The picture terrified everyone. It could have been a plea for help, a manipulative act, or both. But it was certainly a sign of his mental instability. His family took him for evaluation, and he was hospitalized for 5 days with diagnoses of severe depression, social anxiety, and autism. Despite his parents' efforts, the hospitalization didn't resolve his obsession. After being released, Spencer's fixation on Madison only intensified. He continued to stalk her. His behavior becoming increasingly frightening, Madison tried to live normally, spending time with friends, going to school, and preparing for her senior year, but she couldn't shake her constant worry about what Spencer might do next. Sadly, that fear would soon prove justified. On June 3, 2023, Madison planned to meet her mother and friends for lunch at Mr. Chubby's Wings, a casual local restaurant. It was meant to be a simple, pleasant afternoon. Madison and her mom arrived, joined their friends, and for a while, everything felt normal. The atmosphere was relaxed, the food good, and laughter filled the table. About 30 minutes after the meal began, Madison noticed someone watching her from across the restaurant. It was Spencer Pearson. His appearance was no accident. Security cameras later showed that he approached near Madison's table soon after entering, ensuring she saw him. Even on video, Madison's fear was obvious. She and her mother exchanged anxious looks. They had talked before about this possibility. Their plan was clear: leave immediately, don't engage, and get to safety. Madison's friend Casey Estep recalled how Madison and her mother suddenly insisted they had to go right away. Their voices were urgent, their eyes panicked. They quickly asked for the bill, trying to leave the restaurant without attracting attention. Madison's heart was racing as they gathered their things, determined to avoid a confrontation. The plan was simple: get to the car and drive away. But Spencer had been watching them from a window. As soon as Madison and her mother, Jacqueline, stepped outside, he ran after them. What happened in that parking lot was an act of brutal, sudden violence, so shocking that witnesses could barely comprehend what they were seeing. Spencer attacked Madison from behind with a large folding knife his parents had given him, a knife engraved with his personal information. He forced her to the ground and began stabbing her with terrifying intensity. The assault was deliberate, brutal, and meant to kill. Spencer stabbed Madison 17 times, striking her neck, back, and torso. Each blow was aimed to end her life. Madison screamed as witnesses stood frozen in shock. Her mother, Jacqueline Roger, faced with every parent's worst nightmare, rushed in to protect her daughter. Jacqueline threw herself between Spencer and Madison, trying to pull him away. She hit, grabbed, and shielded her daughter with her own body. In response, Spencer turned the knife on Jacqueline, stabbing her in the forehead, hand, and leg. Despite her injuries and heavy bleeding, Jacqueline kept fighting. Determined to save Madison, they probably wouldn't have survived if Kennedy Armstrong, a 22-year-old restaurant manager, hadn't just driven into the parking lot at that moment. Hearing the shouts, Kennedy ran toward the chaos without hesitation. He tackled Spencer to the ground with full force, separating him from Madison and Jacqueline. But Spencer tried to rise again. Still holding the knife, Kennedy tackled him a second time, pinning his arms and preventing another attack. As Kennedy held Spencer and glanced at Madison and Casey, Spencer unexpectedly wounded himself. Those around quickly rushed forward, disarming him before he could inflict a fatal injury. The parking lot was covered in blood. Madison lay on the ground, gravely wounded from 17 stab wounds. Jacqueline was bleeding but conscious, her instinct to protect her daughter keeping her going. Armstrong suffered an injured hand from Spencer's knife damage that would later require several surgeries. Spencer, bleeding from his self-inflicted wounds, was finally subdued. Emergency crews arrived within minutes. Paramedics focused on Madison, whose injuries were catastrophic. One stab had pierced her spinal cord. As they worked to stabilize her, the grim truth became clear. Even if she survived, her life would never be the same. Madison was rushed to the hospital in critical condition. Surgeons saved her life, but the spinal cord injury left her paralyzed from the chest down. The knife cut the nerve pathways between her brain and her lower body. For a teenage girl who had been active and independent only hours earlier, the diagnosis was devastating. Madison would never walk again. The activities she once loved, running, dancing, and simply moving freely, were no longer possible. Her senior year, once filled with plans for prom and college, would instead revolve around hospitals, rehabilitation, and learning to adapt to a new reality. Though doctors worked tirelessly to repair her physical wounds, the psychological trauma was immense. Madison had been betrayed by someone she once trusted, attacked without warning, and nearly killed in a public place under the bright light of day. Jacqueline eventually healed from her physical injuries, the stab wounds to her forehead, hand, and leg. But her emotional wounds ran much deeper. She had fought fiercely to protect her daughter, but couldn't prevent the devastating spinal injury. The guilt and the horrific memories of that day continue to haunt her. Kennedy had a long and difficult recovery ahead of him. Nerve damage in his hand forced him to undergo multiple surgeries and rehabilitation sessions. His courage and quick thinking had unquestionably saved Madison's life. If he hadn't tackled Spencer when he did, the attack might have been fatal. Even so, Kennedy was left with his own physical pain and emotional scars from those terrifying moments. As news of the attack spread, the community came together in support of Madison's family. A GoFundMe campaign helped cover the growing medical expenses, and friends organized vigils. The support was overwhelming, but it couldn't undo what had been done. Madison's life had been changed forever by senseless violence. Spencer survived his self-inflicted injuries and was arrested. He faced 2 counts of attempted first-degree murder and 1 count of aggravated battery causing serious bodily harm. The evidence was irrefutable, from surveillance cameras and witness testimony to the murder weapon itself. Yet for Madison's family, the legal process mattered less than the daily challenge of rebuilding their lives. Madison began months of intensive physical therapy, learning to use a wheelchair and adapting to a body that could no longer move as before. Each day brought new frustrations and heartbreak. Doctors confirmed what she understood but didn't want to believe. Paralysis was permanent, and no surgery could repair a severed spinal cord. She will have to rely on a wheelchair for the rest of her life, and will need help from others with basic daily activities. However, Madison was stronger than anyone imagined. Even she herself didn't realize it. Over the next 11 months, she defied every expectation. The teenager who had been told she would never walk again decided that wasn't going to be her story. She vowed to prove the doctors wrong. She would walk again. Before graduation, rehabilitation was grueling beyond imagination. Every day, Madison worked with therapists, pushing her body to the limit. The pain was unbearable, and progress came painfully slow, measured in tiny, almost invisible improvements. There were setbacks and moments of despair, times when recovery seemed impossible. Still, Madison never gave up. She found strength in her mother, who had put herself between her daughter and a knife. She drew inspiration from Kennedy, who had risked his life for a stranger, and she discovered within herself a deep well of resilience she hadn't known existed. Gradually, almost impossibly, Madison began to regain movement. It started small, a toe twitch, a faint muscle contraction. Her therapists worked tirelessly, stimulating muscles and retraining neural pathways to find new routes. Doctors watched her in awe. This wasn't supposed to happen. Severed spinal cords don't heal. Paralyzed teens don't walk again. But Madison was rewriting the rules. Month by month, her strength returned. First came small leg movements, then standing with support, then taking one step, then another. The wheelchair that had once seemed permanent became something she used less and less. Therapy sessions that used to leave her drained began to show real, measurable results. Her doctors called it remarkable. Her therapists called it extraordinary. Her family called it a miracle. Madison called it the hardest, most important thing she had ever done. At graduation in May 2024, less than a year after the attack that left Madison paralyzed, she walked onto the stage to receive her diploma at Ponte Vedra High School. She walked unaided, head held high, her smile radiant. The auditorium erupted in applause. Many people were moved to tears, deeply touched by Madison's strength and extraordinary determination. Her walk was not just a personal triumph, but a declaration that violence is not the end, and that the human spirit can overcome even the most devastating trauma. In each step, Madison embodied hope and strength, refusing to let her attacker dictate her future. While Madison focused on recovery, the criminal case progressed. In July 2024, just over a year after the attack, Spencer changed his plea from not guilty to guilty on all charges. At the November 2024 sentencing hearing, the courtroom was filled with family, friends, supporters, and media. Following Madison's inspiring recovery, Spencer's defense attorneys asked the judge for leniency, citing his youth, mental health struggles, lack of violent history, and conditions such as depression, anxiety, and autism. They argued he needed specialized treatment rather than a lifetime in prison. Judge Lee R. Smith acknowledged Spencer's mental health challenges and age, but emphasized that these factors could not excuse his actions. Then Madison addressed the court. She recounted the moment she realized she was paralyzed, the months of excruciating rehabilitation, and the daily pain that followed. She spoke of losing the ability to perform simple tasks and described her condition as a life sentence. Urging the judge to give Spencer the same, Madison's mother, Jacqueline Roje, described the terror of watching her daughter being attacked and the lasting trauma it caused. Nightmares, constant fear, and a life forever changed. Kennedy Armstrong, who intervened during the attack, spoke of his injuries, his decision to act, and his anger at watching Spencer destroy Madison's future. Because he couldn't accept a breakup, Spencer apologized, claiming deep remorse and acknowledging that June 3rd was the worst day of everyone's lives, including his own. But Judge Smith stated that remorse could not outweigh the severity and lasting harm of the crime. Some acts, he said, demand the harshest penalty. He noted that without Kennedy's bravery and Jacqueline's quick actions, Spencer would have succeeded in killing Madison. Judge Smith sentenced Spencer Pearson to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As the judge announced the sentence, Spencer's family wept, while Madison's family embraced one another in relief. After 538 days, they finally felt that justice had been served. Soon after, Madison and Jacqueline filed a civil lawsuit seeking damages from Spencer, his parents, and Mr. Chubby's Wings restaurant. The lawsuit argued that Spencer's parents were aware of his mental health issues, but still allowed him access to the knife used in the attack. It also claimed the restaurant failed to provide proper security and did not contact the police after Madison and her mother warned staff that they were afraid of Spencer. The case highlighted how acts of violence often stem from a series of preventable failures that ultimately lead to tragedy. Today, Madison continues both her recovery and her advocacy work. Physical therapy is an ongoing process, and maintaining her mobility requires lifelong effort. The psychological scars will likely never fade completely. She still experiences nightmares, fear, and days when the emotional weight feels unbearable. Yet, there are also moments of joy, achievement, and hope. Madison's story has touched the hearts of countless people who are inspired by her refusal to let what happened define them. She demonstrates that surviving, recovering, and thriving are distinct but all possible. Even after immense trauma, Madison now advocates for victims of domestic violence and stalking, using her platform to raise awareness about warning signs and the importance of taking threats seriously. On social media, Madison documents her ongoing journey, not for attention, but to encourage others facing their own struggles. Her posts reveal the hard work of therapy, moments of progress, setbacks, and ultimately, a life being fully lived rather than merely endured. Spencer Pearson will have to spend the rest of his life in prison. His obsession has utterly destroyed his own future. Just as he attempted to destroy Madison's, his case stands as a severe reminder of the dangers of untreated mental health crises. Meanwhile, Kennedy Armstrong and Jacqueline Roget received the Carnegie Medal, one of North America's highest honors for civilian heroism, for their split-second, selfless actions that saved Madison's life. Madison herself is perhaps the least impressed by her achievements, seeing her recovery simply as doing what was necessary. But to those who know her story, she represents something profound, proof that the human spirit can endure and rise above even the darkest attempts to destroy it. She walked when doctors said she never would. She smiled when despair seemed inevitable. Hope Melton was reported missing the day after Christmas. A few weeks later, her body was found. Between her disappearance and the discovery of her body lies a terrifying silence. No witnesses, no cries for help, no sign that anything had gone wrong. She left home, drove down a familiar road, and simply vanished. When police located her car, it was abandoned in a remote area, locked, undisturbed, with no signs of struggle, no blood, nothing to explain her disappearance. All of her belongings remained inside, only Hope was gone. Then, when her body was found in the woods, the case transformed from a baffling disappearance into a chilling murder investigation. The question no longer was where she was, but who had taken her from that road and how they had done it, unseen, in broad daylight. The call comes in the afternoon, quiet and ordinary. December 26, 2011. Hope Melton is on the line with her grandmother, speaking from her car somewhere along a rural South Carolina road. Her voice sounds calm, nothing urgent. She says she is driving back to her home in Conway after Christmas with her family. It is the last confirmed conversation anyone will ever have with her. That fact is simple and uncontested. The time, the date, the call record. According to the investigation file, the phone disconnects normally. No distress signal, no raised voice, just an ending, and then silence. Hope Melton is 27 years old and lives alone. She has a job and stays in contact with her family. She isn't the type to vanish without a word. So, when she doesn't come home that night, no one worries at first. Travel can be delayed by long distances, dead phone batteries, or bad weather. However, as the hours turn into a full day, concern begins to grow. By December 27, family members begin calling again and again. The phone no longer rings, it goes straight to voicemail. That change is noted later by investigators as a key behavioral break. A device that had been active is now unreachable. Something has altered the pattern. Hope's family reports her missing to law enforcement. Officers take down details: her car, her route, the last call. They mark the timeline starting with that brief conversation. It becomes the anchor point. Everything before it is known. Everything after it is uncertain. Hope's car is a white Pontiac G6. According to traffic data and gas station receipts reviewed later, she had been traveling alone. No confirmed passengers. No known conflicts that day. No messages suggesting fear. The absence of warning becomes part of the mystery. In the days that follow, investigators begin retracing the route Hope likely took. They canvass gas stations. They ask for surveillance footage. They drive the same roads. The landscape is wide and quiet. Pine trees, long stretches without witnesses. A place where someone can vanish without noise. Everyone is waiting, hoping Hope Melton isn't harmed. Officially, she's still just a missing person. But with each passing hour, the situation looks more and more grim. The last call is not dramatic. That is what makes it unsettling. It offers no explanation, no clue. Just a timestamp and a voice that fades. If nothing was wrong when Hope Melton hung up the phone, then what happened in the minutes that followed? Hope Melton, before becoming a missing person case, led a predictable life. She lived in the small, familiar city of Conway, South Carolina, and worked as a waitress. People who knew her described her as reliable. She was punctual and responsive. When she disappeared, investigators found no clear warning signs. There were no recent violent breakups, sudden money gains, or reported threats to explain her disappearance. This lack of obvious risk factors only deepened the mystery. Hope is close to her family, especially her grandmother. Phone records later confirm regular contact. Nothing in the days leading up to December 26 suggests she is preparing to leave or disappear. She has plans, shifts to work, personal belongings left at home. According to the investigation file, there is no packed luggage, no farewell messages, and no withdrawals from her bank account after she vanishes. On Christmas Day, she visits relatives. It is unremarkable. No arguments reported. No witnesses describe tension. The next day, she gets into her car and drives back toward Conway. This is not a long journey. It is a route she knows. One she has driven before. The deviation happens quietly. She does not arrive. As police begin assembling her background, they find no indication she was seeking new connections. Her social circle is small. Familiar faces, co-workers, family. According to statements later reviewed in court, no one reports her expressing fear of a specific individual. That detail matters because early investigations often start closest to home: romantic partners, friends, family members. In Hope Melton's case, those avenues yield little. Alibis check out, timelines hold. There is no immediate suspect. The environment around her disappearance is deceptively calm. There are no witnesses calling in dramatic sightings. No screaming was reported along the roadway. No abandoned belongings were found in the first searches. Just a woman who did not return from a drive she should have completed easily. Investigators begin to understand that if something happened to Hope, it likely happened fast. A brief encounter, a narrow window, possibly with someone she did not know. That realization shifts the tone of the case. Randomness enters the equation, and with it, fear. Not just for Hope, but for anyone else traveling those roads. Investigators reconstruct Hope's final journey using fragments, gas station records, traffic flow. Surveillance cameras are mounted high above convenience store doors. According to the investigation file, Hope is captured on video at a gas station in Heiress, South Carolina. The footage shows her alone. She appears composed. No visible distress. She pays. She leaves. This image matters. It confirms movement, direction, time. It narrows the window. From that point, the road stretches into rural quiet. Long distances, few cameras, sparse lighting, a place where chance encounters happen without record. Police map out where Hope should have gone next. They drive it themselves, mile by mile. The terrain offers little resistance to disappearance. Days after Hope is reported missing, her white Pontiac G6 is found abandoned in a remote area of Horry County. The location is not random. It is off the main road, secluded. According to law enforcement statements, the vehicle is locked. There are no obvious signs of a struggle visible from the outside. No shattered glass. No blood immediately apparent. Inside the vehicle, investigators find her personal items, purse, identification. According to police reports, nothing suggests she planned to leave the car voluntarily and walk away. Her phone is not recovered with the vehicle. The broken road is not just physical, it is narrative. The car's placement suggests control. Someone knew where to leave it. Someone wanted time. Law enforcement begins widening the search area. K-9 units, ground teams, helicopters. But the landscape resists clarity. Dense woods, swamps, private land. Each hour without a discovery compounds the pressure. At this stage, investigators face a critical uncertainty. Did Hope encounter someone she trusted, or someone she had never seen before? There are no defensive wounds documented yet, no forensic confirmation of violence, only absence. The case begins attracting public attention. Tips come in, most lead nowhere. According to investigators, there is no credible sighting of Hope after the gas station footage. The road has taken her somewhere, but it refuses to say where. And with her car recovered and her trail gone cold, the investigation turns outward away from Hope's life and toward a stranger's. With Hope's car recovered and no sign of her nearby, investigators are forced to confront a hard truth early in the case. Whatever happened did not end where the vehicle was left. According to law enforcement statements, search teams comb the surrounding area for days. Dogs track scents that fade into nothing. Helicopters scan tree lines that reveal no movement. The land absorbs evidence easily. The fact is clear. Hope is not here. Police shift strategy. They stop looking only for Hope and start looking for patterns. They re-examine the car. They document every item inside. They log what is missing, her phone. Small details that might not matter alone, but together suggest interruption rather than choice. Family members wait nearby, watching the search expand and contract like a pulse. Each discovery that is not Hope feels like a loss repeated. Investigators canvass nearby businesses again. They pull additional surveillance footage. They request help from the public. According to the investigation file, one key breakthrough does not come from the woods but from a camera. A gas station surveillance review reveals a dark-colored SUV traveling through the same area around the same time Hope was last seen. The footage is grainy, faces are unclear, but the vehicle stands out because it appears repeatedly. It is not confirmed at this stage whether the SUV interacted with Hope, but proximity alone is enough to elevate interest. Detectives start tracking similar vehicles registered in the area. It is slow work, hundreds of possibilities. Most were ruled out quickly. Others linger longer. According to police records, no immediate suspect emerges, but the idea of a random encounter solidifies. Meanwhile, the search for Hope continues beyond the road. Investigators receive tips about remote properties, abandoned buildings, rural paths. Each lead is checked, most go nowhere. Then, weeks later, the case reaches its most devastating discovery. Hope's remains are found in a wooded area of Horry County. The location is remote. According to official statements, the site is not easily accessible and suggests deliberate placement. An autopsy later confirms she died from a gunshot wound. The manner of death is ruled a homicide. At this point, the atmosphere turns heavy. The uncertainty ends. The question of where Hope is becomes replaced by why she was taken and who decided she would not return. With confirmation of murder, the investigation sharpens. Evidence is no longer speculative. It demands a name, and somewhere in the system vehicle records, surveillance footage, witness memory, that name already exists. Who was behind the wheel of that SUV? After Hope's remains are identified and the case is officially classified as homicide, detectives return to the evidence already collected. They look again at the surveillance footage, the dark SUV, the timing, the repeated appearances. According to the investigation file, the vehicle is not just passing through. It lingers within the same corridor Hope traveled. That pattern matters. Investigators begin matching vehicle descriptions against registration records in the region. Make, model, color, prior stops. This process takes weeks. Many names surface and disappear again. Most owners have verifiable alibis, work records, witnesses, receipts. One does not. The name is Nicholas Jermaine Miller. Miller is 22 years old at the time. He lives in the area. He owns a dark-colored SUV consistent with the one seen on camera. According to law enforcement statements, his movements on December 26 do not fully account for the window when Hope Melton vanished. Gaps appear. Small, but significant. Detectives bring him in for questioning. At first, Miller denies involvement. He acknowledges being in the area but claims he did not encounter Hope. This is not unusual. Many interviews end here. This one does not. According to court records, investigators confronted him with surveillance images and timeline inconsistencies. The pressure increases slowly. Then the story changes. Miller begins to admit contact. He tells investigators he encountered Hope while she was driving. According to his statement, he offered assistance. What happens next is reconstructed through confession, physical evidence, and later forensic confirmation. Prosecutors state that Miller abducted Hope, drove her to a remote location, and shot her. This is the first moment the case fully pivots. The disappearance is no longer ambiguous. It is targeted, violent, final. Investigators corroborate Miller's confession with physical evidence. Ballistics, location consistency, surveillance alignment. According to the prosecution, the account matches what is known and fills in what was missing. Miller is arrested and charged with murder and kidnapping. For Hope Melton's family, the emergence of a suspect does not bring relief. It brings clarity without comfort. The randomness they feared is confirmed. There was no long-standing connection, no warning signs, just proximity and opportunity. Once Nicholas Jermaine Miller is in custody, the investigation stops expanding and begins closing in on itself. Loose ends are tied. Statements are formalized. Evidence is logged for the court. According to prosecutors, Miller's confession becomes the spine of the case, but it is not treated as sufficient on its own. Every detail is tested against what can be proven. The facts align, the route, the timing, the location where Hope's body was found. Ballistic evidence confirms the cause of death as a gunshot wound. Investigators establish that Hope did not know Miller. There is no prior connection, no digital trail linking them before that day. The encounter is, by all available evidence, random. That randomness becomes central in the courtroom. Miller is charged with murder and kidnapping. The state initially seeks the death penalty. According to court records, the prosecution argues that Hope was abducted from her vehicle, transported against her will, and killed in a remote area to eliminate a witness. The defense does not dispute that Miller caused her death. Instead, it focuses on mitigation. Mental health enters the record. Defense attorneys present evidence that Miller had a history of intellectual disability and psychological limitations. Evaluations are conducted. Experts testify. According to the proceedings, these factors influence how the case moves forward, not in determining guilt, but in determining punishment. Hope Melton's family is present. They listen to details they did not ask to know. The confession removes uncertainty, but it replaces it with permanence. In 2013, Miller pleaded guilty. In exchange, the death penalty is taken off the table. The judge sentences him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. There is no dramatic verdict moment, no jury deliberation climax. The outcome is procedural, final. According to public records, Miller does not appeal the conviction. The legal process ends as quietly as the crime began. For the system, this is a resolution. For Hope's family, it is an ending that does not feel complete. No sentence can restore what was taken. No explanation offered in court answers the deeper question of why Hope Melton crossed paths with the wrong person at the wrong moment. The confession closes the case legally. Emotionally, it leaves space unfilled, because even with a name, a face, and a prison cell, the violence still feels uncontained, like something that could happen again. What remains after justice is delivered, but meaning is not. After the sentence is handed down, the courtroom empties. The case file closes. The system moves on. For Hope's family, time does not. According to public statements made in the years following the trial, her relatives describe a grief that arrives in waves. Not loud, not public, persistent. Hope is not a headline to them. She is a chair left empty. A phone number that no longer answers. A life that stopped mid-motion. There is no sense of triumph in the conviction. The man responsible will never walk free. but that certainty offers little relief. The violence was random. That fact lingers like an unresolved threat. If it could happen to Hope, it could happen to anyone. The atmosphere surrounding the case after sentencing is subdued. There are no rallies, no ongoing appeals, no media circus, just a quiet acknowledgement that a young woman's life ended violently on a road she had driven before without fear. Hope's family chooses remembrance over spectacle. According to interviews, they speak about her kindness, her reliability, the ordinariness of her plans. These details matter because they counter the way victims are often reduced to the moment of their death. Hope Melton is remembered for how she lived, not how she was taken. Law enforcement agencies reflect on the investigation as well. The case reinforces uncomfortable truths about rural vulnerability, long stretches of road, limited surveillance, the difficulty of responding quickly when a crime leaves no immediate trace. According to investigators, the successful resolution depended on persistence, video footage, and a suspect who eventually spoke. There is no warning sign that could have saved Hope Melton, no behavior she could have changed, no choice she could have made differently based on the evidence presented. That reality shifts responsibility away from the victim entirely, where it belongs. The aftermath is defined by absence, but also by resolve. Hope's name becomes part of local memory, not as a cautionary tale about mistakes, but as a reminder of how fragile safety can be. Her family carries forward without closure, but with clarity. They know what happened. They know who did it. What they cannot know is why this encounter occurred at all, and that unanswered question is where the case leaves the rest of us aware, unsettled, and forced to look at ordinary roads differently. What does justice mean when it arrives too late to matter to the person it was meant to protect? On September 4, 1894, a burned body discovered in Philadelphia marks the beginning of a case that will later be buried under myth, exaggeration, and spectacle. At first, the facts appear narrow and technical: a corpse chemically altered, a fire staged to suggest an accident, and a name attached to the remains: Benjamin Freelon Pitezel. What investigators uncover in the days that follow is not a crime of passion or chance, but a deliberate act tied to fraud, identity manipulation, and control. The suspect, publicly known as H. Holmes. As the investigation widens beyond one body and stretches across state and national borders, it becomes clear that Pitezel's murder is not the end of a scheme but its first clue, showing how ordinary trust can be exploited. Holmes was adept at disappearing within his own disguises. In the record, he is a con artist with a long resume: fraud, swindles, shifting identities, moving city to city as if motion itself can erase accountability. But in Philadelphia, motion becomes traceable. A murder charge does not care how charming a man can sound when he lies. And a question forms early: if Holmes was willing to kill the partner he needed for the con, what else was he willing to do once the fraud stopped being enough? What comes next is the pivot investigators cling to, the narrowing from myth to measurable proof. Because Pitezel is not the end of the story, he is the doorway, and behind it, 3 children will vanish into the same trail, forcing the case to expand beyond a single body into a hunt across borders. The man the newspapers call H. Holmes did not begin that way. He was born Herman Webster Mudgett in 1861 in rural New Hampshire. That is the first verifiable fact investigators return to when the story begins to swell beyond control. Accounts from court records and contemporary reports portray his early life as quiet and unremarkable. He studies medicine and anatomy, learning to translate bodies into paperwork. The investigation file suggests that even before Chicago, there were hints of fraud, insurance schemes using cadavers, false claims, debts left behind like footprints in snow. Nothing sensational, but a pattern emerges, profiting by manipulating death without causing it, at least at first. Allegedly, what makes Holmes dangerous is not violence alone, it is adaptability. He marries more than once. He abandons his spouses without divorcing. He assumes roles easily: doctor, entrepreneur, husband, widower. Each identity overlaps with another. When one collapses, he steps sideways into the next. Investigators later note how difficult it is to chart his movements because his life is not linear. It is layered. By the late 1882s, Mudgett had fully recast himself. He becomes Henry Howard Holmes. Chicago offers anonymity and opportunity. The city is expanding. People are arriving faster than records can keep up. Holmes understands something crucial. In a growing city, absence does not always register as an alarm. Holmes is not hiding in the shadows. He operates in daylight. He runs pharmacies. He hires workers, then dismisses them before they fully understand what they're building. According to later testimony, he keeps financial control tight and personal details vague. No one ever sees the full structure. Investigators looking back see this as preparation, not for a single crime, but for insulation. When questions come, there is always another address, another name, another explanation ready. And that raises the next question, one that law enforcement would not fully confront until years later. When a man practices becoming someone else for so long, how do you prove who he was when the crimes occurred? Because Chicago is where Holmes stops merely borrowing from death and begins designing around it. On the corner of West 63rd Street and Wallace Avenue, in Chicago's Englewood neighborhood, a building began to rise in the early 1892s. It is later called a castle, but at the time, it is something simpler and more deceptive. A mixed-use structure with shops on the ground floor and rooms above. The fact is clear and documented. H. Holmes owns the property. He oversees its construction, and he does so in fragments. Workers are hired and fired in quick succession. According to later testimony, no one stays long enough to understand the full layout. Staircases lead nowhere. Hallways bend oddly. Rooms are sealed off. Whether these features were intentionally designed for murder has been debated for more than a century. What is officially confirmed is narrower. Holmes controlled access, withheld plans, and ensured that no single person ever saw the whole. The hotel sits near the grounds of the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition. Chicago is flooded with visitors. Holmes advertises jobs. Young women arrive alone, seeking work. He offers lodging. Some of these women are later documented as employees or acquaintances. Some disappear from the historical record shortly after. Investigators would later struggle to determine how many vanishings can be directly tied to Holmes and how many were absorbed into the noise of a city in motion. Years later, when police eventually search building, they do not find a neatly preserved crime scene. They find alterations, removals, a structure already stripped of much physical proof. Sensational accounts would later exaggerate what was found. The investigation file is more restrained. It notes chutes, locked rooms, and evidence of chemical use. Enough to disturb, not enough to convict. This becomes a critical investigative problem. If the hotel can't speak clearly, the case must rest on something else: paper, letters, movements, and the people who left Chicago with Holmes and never returned. That shifts the focus away from the building itself and toward the relationships formed inside it. Because the next provable crime does not happen in Englewood. It happens on the road. At the center of that road is Benjamin Freelon Pitezel, still alive, still trusting, and about to be used not as a partner, but as a template. Benjamin enters the record not as a victim, but as a collaborator. That is the first uncomfortable fact. He is a carpenter, a father, a man with debts and limited options. By 1894, he is working with Holmes on a plan that appears, on paper, almost harmless: a life insurance fraud. Benjamin will fake his death. Holmes will collect the payout. They will split the money. According to court testimony, Benjamin agrees. The scheme is documented. The trust is real. There is no sign, at least initially, that Benjamin believes his life is at risk. He writes letters to his wife. He follows instructions. He rents a room in Philadelphia under an assumed name. This is where the deviation occurs. Benjamin does not disappear as planned. He dies. The medical evidence presented at trial is precise for its time. Benjamin is killed before the fire. Chloroform is found in his system. His throat is cut. The burning comes after. The scene is staged to support the fraud, but the order of events betrays intent. According to the investigation file and trial record, this is not a mistake or escalation. It is a decision. What follows deepens the crime. Holmes does not flee immediately. Instead, he steps into the role Benjamin can no longer play. He meets with the insurance company. He presents documentation. He convinces them of the death. He collects the money. Then he turns to Benjamin's family, not to confess, but to continue the lie. Holmes tells Mrs. Benjamin that her husband is alive and hiding. He offers to protect 3 of her children while authorities search for the missing man. This is one of the coldest moments in the case, because it is fully unnecessary. The money has already been paid. The murder is complete, yet Holmes chooses control over distance. This is no longer about fraud. It is about power. According to later testimony and correspondence, Holmes moved the children across state lines. He writes letters in Benjamin's name. He keeps the family compliant with hope. And this raises the next investigative question, one that will pull federal authorities into the case. If Holmes has already killed to secure the fraud, why keep the children at all? The answer will not come quickly. It will come through travel records, rented rooms, and a detective who decides to follow the letters. After Holmes is arrested on insurance fraud charges, the task of finding the Pytezel children falls to Detective Frank Geyer of the Philadelphia Police. The fact guiding his work is simple and devastating. 3 children are missing, and the last confirmed adult with them is now in custody. According to the investigation file and later court testimony, Holmes has left a trail on paper notes sent to Mrs. Pytezel, instructions about where the children are supposedly being kept, and explanations that shift just enough to delay panic. Geyer does not challenge the letters. He follows them. He heads west, then north, Indianapolis, Detroit, Toronto. At each stop, he checks boarding houses, hotels, and rented rooms, questioning landlords who recall a quiet man traveling with children. The descriptions match: calm, polite, passing through. The trail cools, but it doesn't disappear. In Toronto, the investigation reaches its first irreversible turn. Geyer finds a rented house tied directly to Holmes. Inside, the evidence is not symbolic, it is physical. 2 of the Pytezel children are discovered buried in the cellar. According to the coroner's findings, they were killed deliberately. The cause of death is not accidental. The setting offers no ambiguity. The case has crossed from suspected homicide into documented multiple murder. Geyer does not stop. He returns to the United States and continues the search for the 3rd child, Howard Pytezel. In Indianapolis, the final location resolves the last uncertainty. The remains of the boy were found in a chimney. The forensic conclusions align with what was already known. The children were killed after being moved repeatedly. Their deaths are not tied to panic or impulse. They are spaced, planned, and concealed. This sequence becomes the backbone of the prosecution. Unlike the Chicago property, unlike the rumors, the children's deaths are anchored to places, dates, and actions Holmes cannot reframe. Geyer transforms suspicion into a narrative that the court can understand, and it leads to a question Holmes can no longer escape. If the murders of the children were unnecessary to the fraud, what did Holmes gain by keeping them alive long enough to move them and kill them, one by one? The trial begins in October 1895, not with legends, but with restraint. The prosecution makes a deliberate choice. Despite the growing number of suspected victims and the mounting public pressure, Holmes is charged with a single murder, the killing of Benjamin Freeland Pytezel. This is the fact the state believes it can prove beyond doubt. Outside, newspapers speculate about dozens, even hundreds of victims. Inside, the judge limits the scope. Rumor is excluded. Sensation is filtered out. What remains is evidence that can survive cross-examination. The medical testimony is central. Doctors testify that Benjamin was rendered unconscious with chloroform before his throat was cut. The fire came later. This sequence dismantles the defense's suggestion of an accidental death during a fraud gone wrong. According to the trial record, the jury is shown how the scene was staged and how the chemistry contradicts Holmes's account. Holmes takes the stand. He speaks calmly. He denies the murder. He shifts blame. At times, he suggests that Benjamin died accidentally, that the children were alive when he last saw them, and that others are responsible. His statements are internally inconsistent. Dates slide. Locations blur. The prosecution does not rush him. They let the contradictions accumulate. The feeling in the courtroom changes as the trial progresses. Holmes's intelligence is evident, but so is his detachment. Witnesses describe his behavior after the murder: collecting insurance money, managing correspondence, and maintaining control. The jury is asked to consider not just what happened in that Philadelphia room, but what Holmes did afterward, and why. Detective Geyer's findings are introduced carefully, not to expand the charges, but to establish pattern and intent. The children's deaths are referenced as context, not as counts. The message is subtle and devastating. This was not an isolated decision. On November 30, 1895, the jury returns its verdict: guilty. Holmes is sentenced to death. The legal system has spoken, narrowly and decisively, but conviction does not bring clarity. Instead, it creates a new incentive. With appeals exhausted and execution scheduled, Holmes begins to talk, not to the court, but to the public. With the verdict secured and the sentence fixed, Holmes enters a different phase of the case, one not governed by evidence, rules, or judges' instructions. He begins to confess, not once, but many times. Each version is different. Each one is offered to a newspaper willing to pay. The fact investigators and historians agree on is this: Holmes gave multiple confessions in the months leading up to his execution, and they contradict one another. In some accounts, he claims 27 victims. In others, far fewer. At times, he insists he feels remorse. In others, he describes himself as detached, even hollow. According to contemporary journalism and later analysis, Holmes understood the value of narrative. He knew attention could be monetized. Reporters compete for access. Headlines grow darker. Numbers inflate. The public appetite for horror expands faster than verification can follow. Holmes feeds that appetite selectively. He offers just enough detail to sound credible, then shifts the frame. Names change. Locations blur. The confessions become performances. Investigators are skeptical. According to the investigation file and later scholarly review, many claims Holmes makes cannot be corroborated by missing persons reports, timelines, or physical evidence. Some alleged victims are later found alive. What remains provable stays small: Benjamin Pitezel and Pitezel's 3 children. This distinction matters, because it separates what Holmes did from what he wanted to be remembered for. His confessions inflate his myth. The record deflates it. Holmes, allegedly, exaggerates his crimes for profit and control, even as his own life narrows to a cell. The feeling here is unsettling, not because of what Holmes says, but because of how easily the story slips away from the victims. Their names are overshadowed by his. Their lives are reduced to numbers that rise and fall depending on the edition. In his final statements, Holmes claims his body is inhabited by the devil. It is one of his most quoted lines. Investigators dismiss it. There is no evidentiary value. It explains nothing. It only redirects attention. On a May morning in Philadelphia, the state will end Holmes's ability to speak and fix his story in silence. At 10:13 am, on May 7, 1896, in Moyamensing Prison, Philadelphia, H. Holmes is led to the gallows. This is the final, verifiable fact in the case. The execution is orderly, witnessed, documented. Holmes does not struggle. According to official accounts, his death is not immediate. The drop does not break his neck. He dies slowly, over several minutes, as the crowd watches in silence. Holmes's last requests are practical. He asks that his body be buried in concrete, deep enough to prevent grave robbers. Even in death, he seeks control, over access, over narrative, over what remains. With the execution complete, the legal case closes, but resolution does not follow. Holmes leaves behind a vacuum filled quickly by myth. Newspapers continue to publish inflated victim counts. The Chicago building is retroactively transformed into a chamber of horrors. Details are added that cannot be traced to police records or court testimony. Over time, the legend overtakes the evidence. The fact remains narrower and colder. Holmes is a convicted murderer of Benjamin Pitezel. He is responsible, beyond dispute, for the deaths of Pitezel's 3 children. Everything beyond that exists in contested space, some possible, some exaggerated, some invented outright. The investigation never produces a definitive number of total victims. That uncertainty is not a failure of justice. It is the limit of proof. The feeling that lingers is not fear, but unease. Holmes did not rely on brute force or chaos. He relied on systems, insurance, housing, trust, anonymity. He exploited how people assume paperwork equals safety and how movement can erase attention. The case exposes a social vulnerability as much as an individual crime. Holmes's name endures in history books and documentaries. Their names surface more quietly, carried by court records and burial sites. And that is the final question the case leaves behind, unresolved and still relevant. When society remembers the architect of a crime more vividly than the people erased by it, who is justice really serving?